Hello everyone, welcome to yet another day in this clown decade, the decade where things are only going to get worse before they get better. And once again, if you want to keep up with all things clown decade, please do subscribe to the channel and of course become a channel member. Once again, it is Slop for the Slop Gods, which I suppose is you, my piggy audience. We are looking into the vast depths of the brains of people like Charlie Downs, Connor Tomlinson, and of course Carl Benjamin, more colloquially known as popularised by Dr. David Starkey as
Lowemosexuals.
And, well, a few of them appear to be having a bit of a change of heart recently, because all of these people have been against reform. Reform is just Tory 2.0. They're clearly part of the establishment. And basically, the one and only reason, well, not one and only reason, but a very large reason I've always said, well, that's obviously not true, is obviously Zia Yusuf, who effectively has been Farage's attack dog against the Tories and the wider establishment for some time. And, well, plenty of people know it. I don't know how many times I've heard Fraser Nelson say, Zia Yusuf just seems to hate the establishment and everyone who was in Labour and Tories over the last 16 years now. And he always seems to misunderstand why, given that at the same time Zia Yusuf comes across as, frankly, a fairly deep thinker and comes across as very well spoken. And the answer is because he, like a lot of other people, especially in the Reform membership, feel very betrayed. And obviously for the past 2 years, I have an entire catalogue of it, I've been an avid defender of Zia Yusuf, even if I don't think he's perfect, and I have criticised him in the past. I'm very sorry, Zia. And I have especially defended him against claims from Lotus Munchers, Charlie Dowds, and other restorers, who effectively throw him in with the rest of this establishment lot, which I've always just found absolutely insane. And frankly, they're also pretty open that they don't like him because he's Muslim, which again, I just find absolutely insane, especially because he's much more theologically inclined to Christianity than people like Charlie Downs, Carl Benjamin, or Connor Tomlinson. None of them could have a theological debate with you, and I've seen some of them in theological debates, and they suck. So even that's quite a wild one, but I'll touch upon that. We'll get into the main thrust of this, because I'm going to give you a slop double helping, clips from Connor Tomlinson and clips from Carl Benjamin. But before we get to that, here are literally some of the only nice things I've heard them say about Zia Yusuf ever. Charlie Downs. First they ran a weeks-long campaign to try and destroy me. Don't worry, Charlie, I think it's working. And now they're doing the same to Zia Yusuf, which, not really. You're being attacked for completely stupid things you've said on Twitter. Zia Yusuf is being attacked because he actually tells Tories they're traitors to their face.
And Reform is routinely polling at north of 30%. We've got 265,000 members. And I think I speak on behalf of Nigel, who's here tonight, and everyone else at Reform, and I say, and we genuinely and sincerely mean this, we could not have done it without you. Your ability, no, I've got to give credit where it's due. Your ability to vaporize your public support in such a short period of time is something to behold. So I encourage you all, please enjoy the delicious food, enjoy the beautiful wine, this incredible venue, and the hospitality of our friends at The Spectator, because soon enough, you'll all lose your seat and you will not be invited again. Thank you very much, everyone. Have a good luck.
I was going to cut that down, but I just love the whole clip. But you get the idea. It's always been ridiculous to say he's part of the establishment, which people like this have done before. They've said everyone in Reform's part of the establishment. Clearly, there is a highly coordinated effort by the establishment to neuter the right and merge it under the banner of the Tory party. Yeah, you've been part of that, by the way. That's exactly what Restore have been trying to do, and it's been pretty obvious. And I've even done a video in the past where it looks like that's what you've tried to do. In fact, I made that video around the time you were trying to work for Robert Jenrick when he was still in the Tory party, so again, good one. Kind of riffs on a similar point. While I wonder who the anonymous Reform source briefing against Zia Yusuf at the Times, Specky, Observer, Telegraph and Daily Mail has been the whole time. Everyone suspected it's Tim Montgomery. Montgomery basically confirmed it was him in the Spectator article, saying, oh, I didn't brief the press over the weekend on that occasion, implying he's done it on other occasions. Which we know Tim Montgomery doesn't really like Zia Yusuf because, and he's not the only one, there's people in Reform that don't want Zia to go on the attack line as hard as he is anymore, you know, calling Ben Wallace a traitor and moron. Especially if we're trying to go down the route of, let's not have stochastic terrorism, which, I can understand the reasoning behind that, and even if it is a guilty pleasure of mine. However, Tim Montgomery has gone a bit overboard with all that, even going to The Spectator to, air all this dirty laundry in public, which obviously you're not supposed to do in Reform, and if you do it numerous times and too many times for your station, you get kicked out. So he's kicked out for now, and honestly I support that, and I know a few councillors that are quite happy to see the back of him, and I know there's been some who've made complaints about it to HQ. So in some ways I'm amazed he lasted this long, but Reform are actually relatively tolerant of some criticism and some airing of dirty laundry, but you can do it too much. Let's ask Montgomery, who used the exact same language as the source in the podcast and wants Zia to stop counselling the Tories because it makes a coalition with the Conservatives less likely, which again, Harrison Pitt literally asked Michael Gove, why don't you make Rupert Lowe leader of the Tories? These people are actually open to working with the Tories. They just want to be at the top rung of the ladder as part of the coalition. They basically want to take it over. So they're not against working with Tories. They're just having to say they are now because Reform are much harder on saying never working with Tories ever. Even though, let's be real, if we had to make a coalition with them, we probably would. But, we're trying to make sure that we don't have to have a coalition next election. So again, this never worked with Tories ever. Connor Tomlinson was happy to work with them in 2024 and beyond, even working with Liz Truss for a little while, who is still a Tory. And only recently, now that the Restore Sheen has been coming off of Rupert Lowe a bit, they are effectively trying to find inroads to other avenues where they can use their I Hate Tories credentials to try and join in. As I say, blacklist these people, never let them in Reform. Maybe you could push me to let them be members, but no more than that, certainly. And even then, being members, I'm a bit iffy on. And again, Connor Tomlinson actually really annoys me with this defence of Zia Yusuf, because he had some of the stupidest complaints about him in the past. Because this isn't the only tweet like this, but Connor Tomlinson did used to tweet like this a lot. Reform have made Zia Yusuf their shadow Home Secretary, and Reform want another Muslim Home Secretary presiding over a Home Office that's been ideologically captured by 700 plus Islamic network controlling migration and counter-terrorism police. What are we doing here, guys? This is the same Zia Yusuf who left the party when poaching proposed we ban the burqa. It's nothing to do with that. Basically, the only thing Zia's actually ever said on this is that he got overstressed, and basically a load of people on Twitter were effectively accusing him of being Muslim and therefore subversive and making vast assumptions on that, and he just didn't want to take it anymore, which, fairly reasonable. I know people, and long-time fans of my channel know who I'm talking about, who were effectively celebrating they hounded Zia out of his position on social media, and I think it was not great of him to admit that, but he came back, needs to take better breaks from Twitter, and, there was a hell of a lot more support for Zia after that from the base, who realised, oh god, we need to show more support for him. And I think that was sort of the first buds of us calling it Zianism, to be honest with you. But anyway, he promises to deport illegal migrants and tackle radical Islam, and they matter much less than his willingness and ability of those making these promises to deliver. Effectively what Connor's saying is, I don't like him because he's Muslim. Which, as I said before, is just such a silly thing to say, because one, he never really does anything that even looks culturally Muslim. In fact, I'd argue he's much more a theological Christian in the few things he's said in the past, quoting Bible verses and such. And I've literally never heard him say the word Allah, by the way. He only ever says God. And two, we literally have a Muslim Home Secretary right now who is the most right-wing Home Secretary I think we've had in 2 decades. So sorry to let you know, Connor, but being Muslim does not mean that you're just going to go along with the Muslim Brotherhood and let in a zillion Syrians or whatever. And, these people just pretend they never tweeted like this. They pretend they never made live streams about this. They just pretend like this never happened. And unless all of this stuff is addressed properly and they figuratively crawl through a mile of glass for their apology, then I'm not taking any of this seriously. They will turn on a 5p piece to go back to saying things like this if any other alternative comes along. These people know they're never getting a job in Reform, and they're only saying stuff like this now because a lot of their audience are basically having a go at them, saying, God, you keep like glazing Restore, but Restore keep making these obvious massive mistakes. Can you be a bit more sensible with all this, please? And so they're having to turn to Zianism because, thank God, it's actually becoming popular. So, Haryan vindicated yet again, but I am very annoyed that grifters are going to grift off this stuff, because it's going to make it uncool very quickly. Anyway, finally we have Carl Benjamin. The Tory wing of Reform is trying to oust Zia, by the way. Yeah, Carl, we know. I've been saying that for 2 years. But again, it's this complete turn on a 5 pence piece. Last week they were all having a go at Zia. Every single one of these people will have been. And again, I think the only reason there's been a change of heart now, frankly, is because they all basically want out of Restore because it's not actually turning into the thing they wanted it to be. They sort of realise, I think, they've been used by Alistair Harrison to get effectively the online cohorts that were trusting all of them to get a massive amount of sort of energy pumped into Restore. And hell, that worked. But now they're all net negatives, and I think they're quietly being kicked out of Restore one way or another. Or at least they're in a position where they want them to leave rather than having to kick them out, because it seems that Restore's one and only policy with membership is we never kick anyone out, which is wild to me, by the way. You can't run a political party on that principle. But if that's the case, they also want them to leave anyway. They just want them to do it of their own volition so they can avoid headlines of neo-Nazis or white supremacists kicked out of Restore. Even though that's better headlines than what they've been getting. But anyway, the thing that annoys me most about Carl Benjamin's tweet here is that, God, for 2 straight years it's just been misinformation, disinformation, and straight-up lies on the Lotus Munch's own channel about Zia Yusuf and reform. I've seen plenty of them. They're happy to just go on Reddit, see 2 commentators talking about how Zia Yusuf's company wasn't great to work for. Shocking. That means he's terrible. Beyond that, they had Tommy Robinson on, who just completely made up that Zia Yusuf had a load of Pakistanis come to run Reform HQ. Never happened, by the way. Donors dinners as well. Oh, it's just full of Pakistanis, don't you know? Zia Yusuf isn't even Pakistani. And they just blare this stuff out without any sort of due diligence into if any of that's true. It's just, they've got Tommy Robinson on. Thousands of views. They love us. It's all a grift, man. And the grift now is Zia Yusuf's clearly anti-establishment. Yeah, again, I noticed for 2 years. And now, effectively, they've had to completely 180 on this whole, oh, God, I wish Reform were anti-establishment. And now they're all admitting they are. And there's no vague sense of an apology or acknowledgement that they've lied about Zia and Reform in the past. No, it's just, they just memory hole it. Sorry, I don't memory hole it. And you're damn right if you think we're going through clips now. Take it away, Mr. Tomlinson. He starts off by talking about the Daily Tea.
About 5 days ago, they did an episode attacking Zia Yusuf because Zia Yusuf said that Ben Wallace, the former Defence Secretary, was a moron and a traitor.
Yep, he's definitely still in that 2024 insurgent party spirit that we all love to see. Again, I can understand the chat of the whole, well, we're talking about stochastic terrorism and, Anne Widdecombe and all that. Then again, you think of the Afghan resettlement scheme and the super injunctions and all that, and, the results of all that too. Not been great, has it?
Ben Wallace knew it was going on, didn't use parliamentary privilege to call it out, decided it was just A-OK, as did the rest of the Conservatives who championed the Afghan resettlement scheme.
Yep, fine with this criticism. Again, it's why I can't completely say, Zia obviously shouldn't have said this, because, well, it does reflect my deeply held feelings, I'm afraid.
Including Robert Jenrick, which is why there's some tension between Zia and Jenrick.
Again, yeah, I've criticised that in the past as well. Well, even the present, to be honest. I've softened on Jenrick, but it's still difficult for me to actually defend him being in the party fully because of this whole Afghan thing. But hey, he's making up for it. He's just in the process of it.
Despite Zia Yusuf's lack of military experience, he's never been responsible for importing millions of immigrants into the country, including thousands of Taliban fighters, murderers and rapists, has he been?
Which is where the initial defences of Zia Yusuf have started to come out. At least he's not a Tory, but they've all developed them from there to Zia actually represents anti-establishment. Shockingly enough, that's been my point for 2 years, so I'm glad to see that people are finally catching up. I and people in my Discord and people who've agreed with me, none of us will get credit for this, and I don't expect to, but, it would be nice to hear some people admit they were wrong, which, to be fair, some people have even DM me and reply to me basically saying, yeah, you're like the most vindicated man ever. So I'll take it where I can, but here we are. I'll just be the guy shouting at these people from the sidelines and then popping a champagne cork when they finally get it. The problem is I don't think they do quite get it. I think they are still desperate for some sort of alternative to Reform. I think they just know that the wheels are coming off Restore, and Reform yet again is their best vehicle. Wow, nuts. Haryan was right again.
Our Boris Wave inquiry will shine a bright disinfecting light on all of the above, and I will not hesitate to declassify the things you did to betray the British people. That's why you're lashing out. Tick-tock, Ben Wallace. Again, I have my criticisms of Zia. Excellent.
I mean, yeah, it's a very good tweet, but What are your criticisms of Zia? Obviously, so far in this video, all I've come up with is you don't like him because he's Muslim. That's literally all you had to say when he was announced as the Home Secretary. But I'd love to know what other criticisms you actually have of him, because honestly, if it's just similar things to what the Lotus Munchers have said, it's basically just all based upon lies. So, what are we doing here? And the other thing is, Zia was actually harsher for the past 2 years to the Tories than he was with that tweet. That's sort of the long line of tweets where, I didn't even read that whole tweet because I'm just like, oh, he's done it again. Don't even have to read it. It's 10 out of 10. And, actually listening to the rest of it with Connor Tomlinson here, I'm like, he's always been like this. Why is it only taken you just till now to start appreciating him and his tweeting? Answer, because these people don't know anything and just go along with whatever their clique are going along with. And at the moment, it's, do you reckon we can recover our reputation with reform? And the answer, I hope to God, is no. Again, if that sounds a little harsh, you have to bear in mind these people have lied and deceived and just been all around negatives about reform for 2 straight years. They can't be trusted, and if anything else comes along that they even remotely think is better and they can be the big fish in the small pond for, they'll jump ship again, so there's just no point.
I have reason to believe that those criticisms also made their way back to Zia at some point, and understanding the direction in which the political winds were blowing, Zia has decided to upgrade his rhetoric and policies. And
see what I mean? They just don't concentrate. No, this is actually Zia sort of mellowing out. He said way worse stuff. I played the clip before where he basically called every Tory and Labour at the Spectator Awards traitors and they're all going to lose their jobs. The man was on Question Time saying directly to 2 Afghanistanis they're going home. Again, this is Zia relatively mellow for Zia. So the idea anything's been upgraded from reform just isn't true. The only way I'd say they've upgraded policy is finally saying how they'll get the Navy in the channel, but they've always wanted to do that, so even that I don't consider upgraded.
You know what? Nothing but praise for it. Well done.
Do you want a Muslim as a Home Secretary now? Is that what you're telling me? Or is that still too cringe for you to say? It's so funny because so many people on Twitter and things like that will reply saying, oh, you want a Muslim as Home Secretary? And I'm just like, yeah. I don't care that he's Muslim. He's the most harsh person on immigration that I have seen in British politics. Throw him in there, get him to sort it out. It's going to be fantastic.
But the Daily T didn't have much praise for it, and Jacob Rees-Mogg and Camilla Tominey, both of whom support the Tories, decided to use their podcast to rubbish Zia Yusuf.
Camilla Tominey, I don't think it's quite fair to say she supports the Tories. I think she's sympathetic to both and sort of leans Tory way, but I think saying she supports them is going a bit far, but then again, I watch the Daily T. Rees-Mogg, obviously, yeah, he just supports the Tories and always has. He's been pretty open about that, so I'm not going to complain about that side of things. But frankly, both are rubbishing Zia because this is just so against what their idea of political discourse should be. Even if they both left the Tories and hate them as much as Zia, they'd probably be saying the same thing.
Accuse him of being a liability. Also attack Restore Britain with a bunch of tired pejoratives.
Oh, the stuff from Restore Britain's just accurate at this point. There's sort of no point even denying it, but you need to sort of save your reputation from that, so I get that.
And perpetuate this op that distances Zia, Restore, and anyone who is anti-Tory from reform to make a pact with the Conservatives, which Mogg is agitating for, much more likely.
Oh god, yeah, both been open about that for ages. Yeah, everyone in the Telegraph and the Tories want a pact because it saves the Tory party. Totally get that. Restore just sort of this thing, not quite laughed at by the Telegraph, but you can sort of tell they don't think it's going to last very long, which I'm totally on board with that as well. But yeah, the main reason they have issues with Zia Yusuf, as much as they're polite when they talk to him and all this sort of thing, they know that he is the main person stopping the Toryfication of reform, which, by the way, is why I've been so defensive of him for 2 years, because that was obvious from the off. If anyone in HQ reflects the disdain that a lot of the reform membership has for the Tories, and I know Camilla goes on about, oh, well, you were Tories like 2 seconds ago. Yeah, I know. I was with them because I had no other option. Now I have reform, so now I can be much more open about my disdain, because there is actually an alternative. And I can put all of that straight through Zia Yusuf, who again was a Tory up until 2024 as well.
And that's why you're in trouble. And what you should have done, and I mean you personally, you should have been tasked with being the head boy, being the top prefect, who took this errant student on. You should have said, Nigel, after the election, come and have a peerage, buddy.
Oh yeah, that's just 100% right, but they didn't do it. They kept him out, and that's why Farage is effectively on the Tories to lend a S train. Again, this has been reformed for quite some time. I keep loving all the, oh my god, all the Tories in reform. There's friggin' 12 of them. And yeah, Nadine Dorris and Nadeem Zahawi, yeah, they're two that I have absolutely no defence for whatsoever, but they're hardly net negatives. Tim Montgomery was a bigger net negative than both of them.
Come back to us.
I didn't have the authority to do that.
First of all, let's just note the feminine register here. It's sitting around gossiping about the respective personalities and dynamics.
Oh, for goodness sake, you work for Lotus Eaters, so do you. Like, why does every Lotus Muncher do this? Oh my god, can you believe every other podcast about politics is just like being gossipy girls? Yeah, that's what every single one is. That's what Laughing at the Guardian is. That's what a lot of podcasts are. Like, how are you only just working this out? Again, I'm not being funny, but Lotus Munchers was saying that Zia Yusuf were bringing a load of Pakistanis into HQ. Not even remotely true, by the way, but we're just gossiping and bitching about it. Again, it's all Connor Tomlinson does on these streams, so I don't know why everyone has to do the Spider-Man point thing. Like, yeah, every political podcast is actually basically 2 or 3 people being women and having a bitch. Are you new to this?
And again, this is the stock and trade of politics, unfortunately, but it codes much more feminine on the Daily Tea.
Well, not shocking. It's typically hosted by a woman and a gay man. You know, Tim Stanley regularly brings up what women wear. You know, I'm used to that. I don't care. They've got interesting insights into Westminster. I'm happy to listen to the cringe bits from Tim and Camilla. Again, you take that stuff out, you're basically listening to the Lotus Munchers, but they know way less about what's going on in Westminster.
And also, if you notice, Camilla Tominay's proposition was, well, this is the fault of the Tories for not effectively containing Farage by making him a Tory peer after Brexit. Because if the Tories just brought Farage into the tent, you wouldn't have this problem. We wouldn't have to be brokering a Conservative Reform pact out in the open and behind closed doors. So again, everything is premised on, oh, this is a bit annoying for us, this is inconvenient, we couldn't possibly have consequences for the Tories who ruin the country, we just need to do containment more effectively.
I mean, this isn't just kind of pompous from him, I also just don't think it's true. I don't think Farage will have stayed as a Tory peer. I don't even necessarily know if he would have been a peer at all, given his criticisms of the House of Lords in the past. I mean, I'm going to go with the assumption he actually would, to be honest with you. But after everything that happened with the Boris wave and all that, I don't think he'd stick around for it, personally. And I don't think it would have changed much of what happened anyway. I think that's the route you've got to go down, rather than just, oh my god, can you believe that they try and contain their enemies? Yeah, that's sort of what the Tory party do. That's sort of the whole shtick of it. That's how they've been such a successful right-wing party for, God, 2 centuries? You know? Come on, keep up. Anyway, Mod goes on to say that it looks like Zia Yusuf is gunning for Nigel Farage's job.
I will say, from what I understand, that's actually not true. Like, Zia Yusuf is not acting as Brutus, sharpening his blade. He's actually very loyal to Nigel Farage these days.
These days? He was always loyal to Nigel Farage. The whole point of Zia Yusuf and his one and only goal is to get Nigel Farage into number 10. That's literally all he wants to do. That's why he's constantly throwing out this rhetoric, and why he's constantly basically trying to make reform effectively cool and insurgent again. Because, let's face it, that's what got us to 30%, as much as the right-on press will tell you otherwise. But that comment sort of bothered me, because once again it just looks like he's not concentrating. Zia has been incredibly consistent for 2 years. Yeah, from what I understand. Yeah, of course it's from what you understand. It's all Zia's said, and no one's ever come out saying otherwise. It's just speculation from, oddly enough, people like Tim Montgomery and Jacob Rees-Mogg. Oh, I think Zia wants to be leader. Yeah, he probably does, but after Farage has had his go in Parliament and done everything he can for 5 years, hopefully 10, frankly, but let's be fair, 5 years will be a pretty good innings, especially if Zia's the Home Secretary for all that time. My god.
It is true that they're both competing, him and Jenrick, to succeed Farage, and that Yusuf thought he had that line of succession locked up before Jenrick's defection.
Oh, I'm with Rees-Mogg, though. I think the membership will get fully behind Zia Yusuf, to be quite honest with you. You might have a bit of trouble with all the people that Jenrick brought over with him, but even people I know like that who came over with Jenrick, they're big fans of Zia, so we'll have to wait and see. And it will be put to the membership, by the way.
But I don't think that Zia Yusuf is eagerly trying to depose Nigel Farage. He is one of the few trusted allies that Farage has around him at this point, and again, those are very few in number. It's less than 2 hands.
That's not true, by the way. It's actually quite a lot of Reform HQ that are loyal to Farage, so I don't know where he's got the idea that it's like 10 people from. But, well, I guess you got to get the gossip out there. Anyway, there's a clip where Camilla Tomley then starts talking about a pact with Restore, how they're not taking it. Oh, it appears that it's Zia Yusuf who's the one who's tacking Farage to the right with mass deportations, even though that's a year ago, and the only thing that was putting Farage off saying that was he thought that it would end up with a load of negative headlines, which it didn't, so we're way past that conversation. And she effectively concludes that Reform have basically the core vote they need from the right, and now it's time to get the floating voters in the middle. I actually sort of agree with Camilla Tomley, but I don't think they're particularly put off by Zia Yusuf's rhetoric. In fact, normies I know who aren't harder right than me, say, actually seem to quite like Zia Yusuf, mainly because he's so well spoken.
Well, clearly Farage doesn't have everyone he needs on the right, because Restore Britain have 150,000 members.
Yeah, alright, how many of them are British? And beyond that, how many of them are still even voting Restore? Restore are, what, between 1 and 3% in the polls at the moment? 4 at a push, I think?
And between 3 to 7 to 8% in opinion polls when prompted.
That's not true at all. They top out, I think the highest I've seen, 6. And yeah, when the funniest one is more in common. They don't prompt Restore, that just goes in other. That other is 2%, so don't think so. This, by the way, this whole Z is actually based, by the way, as well. I don't really trust them. That as much as the sheen has come off Restore, they are still trying their best to back them. Because, frankly, as I say, Tomlinson knows he's not going to be welcomed back into Reform, because he's just way too flaky and will just jump on absolutely anything that's an alternative and never going to win. So I trust him, but he also still needs Restore to be about because it lets him put stuff on his portfolio and CV, even though they're not really using his stuff. And that's part of the reason he thinks the sheen's come off, because they're not using his work on kosher and halal slaughter.
So that would push Reform if you combine those 2 vote shares together, and I'm, again, not saying that there aren't some mutually exclusive voters in both camps, but if you were able to combine those shares, that would be national majority territory.
Again, quite debatable. Whenever Reform and Restore have both been prompted, it's not like you see a drop in Reform support. I'm still of the opinion that people who left Reform for Restore happened a while ago, and actually what they've eaten into is more the Tory vote than anything. Because honestly, the normie view of Restore is absolutely insane. They basically see it as a slightly more Thatcherite Reform party. Like, they've accepted that Restore and Reform are basically the same on immigration. They just all know that, well, effectively, Rupert Lowe seems a bit more respectable to these people. Like, that seems to be why they go for it. It's not this sort of hardline, online, ethno-nationalist circus that have caused that, because those people all already left Reform. But anyway, we're by the by here, and it's still making my point for me. You can't trust Connor Tomlinson because he's still fully on board with the Restore side of things. He's just trying to seem a lot more nuanced with Zia Yusuf, despite the nonsense he's come out with him in the past. Because I think Zia's popularity, especially online, is, well, getting a lot more intense, which we love to see.
And then also notice something that Camilla Tomley says. She implies that Zia Yusuf's usefulness in Reform is to act as an agent of containment, to throw out red meat to the base, to basically say, like Fraser Nelson said, we hear your concerns on immigration, but then once you win, you don't actually do anything about it because you don't want to lose the Waitrose women, the middle-class women.
Oh, yeah, he goes into a whole spiel about this. You get it, though. Don't scare the hose is effectively what Camilla Tomley is saying there. The colloquialism from the online right, which again I'm sort of on board with, but I think that's less to do with immigration, because as I say, I think most of these people want all illegal migrants gone. I want to see less of this sort of Deliveroo driver Britain. And it might be a bit more to do with, are they got to be too harsh on disability benefits? Which I'm already seeing, by the way, on Twitter. A lot of them are complaining about that. And obviously, you don't want to look too gleeful about deporting people, which I think is why it was a bit of a genius move for we're putting the Navy in the Channel as a search and rescue mission rather than a we're going to sink the boats mission. I mean, there's just obviously a level of we need to not scare the middle-class Waitrose women. Sorry, they are actually part of the big tent. And if they're not going to vote Reform, they're going to vote Tories, aren't they? But even then, frankly, Zia's pretty good at getting these women on board anyway, so there we go.
Nevertheless, look at where their priorities are. They think that Zia Yusuf is now the problem, They've already successfully isolated, cut out Restore Britain from the conversation.
I mean, not only that, they have sort of been laughing at Restore for a lot of this time too. I still vividly remember Tim Stanley basically saying, yeah, we know they have a load of sort of neo-Nazi racist tendencies within that party, anti-Semitic too. We've known for ages. It's just never felt like the right time to report on it properly. And that's why I've always sort of gone, oh, that's sort of why you can't take it seriously, because you know it's always going to have a pretty hard cap in the single digits.
And now they've moved on to Zia Yusuf for being too far right. The same strategy that Nigel Farage decided to try and play against Restore Britain, calling them fascists and then getting compared to Oswald Mosley himself. They've now moved their eye onto Zia Yusuf because he is the blockage from within Reform preventing a Reform Conservative pact.
Yeah, but you've got a massive difference here in that the stuff they're saying about Reform they actually had receipts for. You'll notice that none of them are actually saying that Zia Yusuf's racist or anti-Semitic, because they don't have receipts for that, and frankly I don't think he is. So they are trying to get him on things with receipts they do have, which effectively is that, oh, he's a bit too uncivilised for politics, isn't he? And it's like Tim Montgomery said, oh, he's just too childish. But the thing with Tim Montgomery is that he's only working off rumours he's heard from other people and effectively reporting that, so that's not particularly going to stick necessarily either. But when it comes to his recent traitor rhetoric, yeah, that's probably what they're going to try and get him on, but that's not going to damage him as hard as Restore have been damaged by a lot of their members, massive donors, Charlie Downs as well, saying things that are incredibly stupid on Twitter that can easily be justified in calling them anti-Semitic and what have you. So, yeah. As you say, they're not really bothering with Restore and they're aiming at Zia Yusuf now, and because you bark at headlines, you take that as Zia is one of us, when in reality Zia isn't a chud. Zia, in fact, is frankly a bit more of a well-spoken intellectual. And even Fraser Nelson basically says that.
And he can't do that if he's going around sort of suggesting, you know, that millions of people need to be ejected from their homes in the UK.
And don't know whether the king counts as being British or not.
Okay, millions of people do need to be ejected from the UK because it's not their homes.
I mean, yeah, this is always the problem with the chuds as well. All they can really do is say Chad yes, which, yeah, is great for getting little red hearts on Twitter. Unfortunately, in political dialogue, you do actually have to defend that and do it from a principled stance, and that's what Reform have been doing for quite some time, and you've done your best to try and derail that, so thanks for that. To be fair to Connor, I won't go through it, but he does try and come up with a whole load of stats of illegal migrants and people leeching off welfare who aren't British nationals, so fair enough to that. But as I say, he's not particularly good at making those points in a well-spoken manner, frankly, which actually is very important. But as I said before, he's very good at just reciting his eternal script, so there's no points for this, he's just remembered facts and figures, which is basically all he does every stream, by the way. These are actually incredibly boring streams to watch, and it's why I rarely cover them. I'm cutting out quite a lot here, more so than I do even when I've covered Hassan Piker.
And as for the thing of, oh, the king isn't white British, again, Rupert Lowe refused to answer that question because it was a bad faith question by Nick Robinson. The king has a unique ancestral makeup of German, Greek, and Danish, though he is related to both William the Conqueror and Harold Godwinson. So he has an ancestral tie to the land, even though our long-running joke is the royal family are foreign.
God, he's had weeks to come up with a good answer to that, and he didn't even do the basic one, which is that white British on the census, which is what he was asked about, is a self-identifying ethnicity anyway, and obviously the king is going to say he's white British, as any king of England would. And even then that pokes holes in their own ethno-nationalism, because then it begs the question, do we have an opposite of the one-drop rule? Can you be 1% anywhere from Britain and be considered British then? If you have a black parent and a mixed-race parent, so obviously, you know, you're a quarter or an eighth or whatever white British, does that make you British? I don't want to get sidetracked, but again, when he's not reading off a script from his head, he's not very good at this sort of thing. He's always sucked at thinking on the fly. But anyway, let's get back to Zia Yusuf.
But the Telegraph doesn't understand what white British means because it's a census category that you self-identify as.
Oh, so he does know the good answer, which just contradicts everything he said before that anyway. I hate covering him.
And it means that only people with English, Scottish, Welsh and Irish ancestry are likely to press that category.
Ah, but not exclusively, is it? Someone who has both Polish parents could put white British if they feel sufficiently integrated, couldn't they? Oh, sorry, I'm not getting sidetracked on this point. Let's move on.
That's obviously a Lowe suggestion, not a Yusuf one.
Indeed.
Yusuf hasn't been that idiotic.
Connor isn't going to like that one.
I think you're absolutely right.
Look at that chimpy face. And the thing is, I actually have a problem with that. Yusuf hasn't been that idiotic. I don't think Yusuf's done anything particularly idiotic in the public platform. Worst you can say is he's hypocritical for the whole stochastic terrorism thing while calling Ben Wallace a traitor and what have you. But as I say, it's a damn sight more defensible than Labour and what have you calling them fascist and racist like they have done in the past. Talking about grooming gangs is a dog whistle, etc. So yeah, pull that face if you want to, but let's face it, it was idiotic not to just answer the question like you did in the end anyway.
There you go. The entire point of rubbishing Zia Yusuf and Restore Britain is to make a pact between the Conservatives and Reform more likely.
Damn crazy. You're telling me Zia's the person in Reform who is heading the "we're never doing anything with the Tories" faction? Nuts. It's not like I've been saying that for 2 years. Absolutely insane. Meanwhile, you're still supporting Restore, where you've got Rupert Lowe saying, "I don't think Tories are the problem, the civil service are." It's just unbelievable. Like, this is a slow wind down to effectively excuse them for leaving Restore, by the way. The whole plan from the beginning, and this is true all the way back to when Peter Whittle introduced them, they effectively wanted Rupert Lowe actually in the Tory party and leading it. When they realised that wasn't happening, it was pushing to make his own party. He did that. It was, I don't want to say it was a disaster because they obviously had some success, but the wheels and sheen have come off it now, and now it's just a case of maybe we're going to have to pretend we were Zionists all along now. Which, given the things they've said about Zia in the past, never trust them. Literally any sniff of any other vehicle coming along where there can be the big fish in the small pond, as I say, they'll take it. Most untrustworthy people on the planet.
All of this is because Zia refuses to reward the Tories for the Boris wave.
Which is, again, just ostensibly more base than Lowe. What did Lowe do? Lowe has said numerous times on numerous podcasts he's not touching legal migration, and, even Carl Benjamin's nodded his head along to that. Again, why do they do all this? All these people want is political positions and jobs. They want income streams. That's all they're after. They're all grifters, for goodness sake. And because that is my, obviously, takeaway from this, all of this stuff about supporting Zia, to me, feels like they're pining to move away from Restore to get an income stream from Reform or Zia Yusuf. To which I'm pleading with them, don't do it. Because I know some people that are in the mindset of, bring them aboard to make some work for them, keep them out of the public eye, though. Whereas my thought process is, no, that alone is going to bring net negative consequences to Reform. Just keep them out entirely. If they're going to pay them to do anything, pay for their flights to move to America, please. That would be much more preferable.
And this is why Operation Push Zia Out of Reform is underway. On Sunday, there was the announcement that Nigel Farage will get a spot at the Remembrance Day service. But another senior Reform source, who of course is anonymous...
He always does this. Every source in every article is anonymous when it's stuff like this. Because ultimately what it is political journalists got some Politico drunk and they gossiped. That's like 90% of political journalism. You should know this. I thought you were mentored into this, for God's sake.
Briefed to the Mail that Nigel Farage is being urged by close allies to turn off his phone and have some rest, and they're also urging Farage to reboot the party by dismissing Zia Yusuf as Home Affairs spokesman, who apparently annoyed Mr Farage last week by describing the former Tory Defence Secretary, Ben Wallace, as a traitor to Britain.
Yeah, there's no secret there's like an ex-Tory faction within Reform that's effectively full on the Camilla Tominey side of things. But the thing is, you can do what Camilla Tominey wants without dismissing Zia. You can actually do both. Beyond that, yeah, there's plenty of people who have told Nigel Farage to take a rest after all the campaigning he did in Clacton. Fair enough, take 2 weeks with your family. You earned it, son. But yeah, it's not really been a secret that there are people that are disgruntled at Zia because they think that he's too harsh on Tories. Typically, these people are ex-Tories. And I don't even necessarily mean Nadim Zahawi or Nadine Dorries. I'm just talking about some senior staffers they poached. People who are allies of Tim Montgomery, say. But it's pretty obvious from the suspension of Tim Montgomery, and the senior staff that have defended him to the Spectator, the decision I mean, then it's pretty clear Zia's here to stay. So, again, this is just classic internal party factionalism. You tend to get that when you start to get double digits in polls.
But also, I happen to know that Nigel Farage wasn't annoyed with Zia. He just told the Sun reporter, I'll talk to him, to get the Sun reporter to stop asking about it and piss off in Clacton.
It's quite funny how he has this habit of saying, oh, I happen to know that Nigel Farage wasn't actually annoyed at Zia, and his source is something that he said publicly. Connor's just got this habit of saying, oh, I know things, And then it's either something that's already really, really public, but implying that he's got some insider source, or he just cites some insider source, and I know it's someone that's fed him false information.
Nigel has fallen out of love with Zia, who is out of control. I think his days are numbered. Rupert Lowe only left because Zia went for him so hard over some HR nonsense. If Zia goes, Rupert could be persuaded back. Oh, curious. Okay, so there are now anonymous sources in Reform saying that they want to get Rupert back by dismissing Zia Yusuf.
Yeah, and they were on the Tory faction of things, Connor. I know, it's crazy, isn't it? Why would they want to get rid of Zia Yusuf and bring back Rupert Lowe? I don't know. Maybe they want to bring the guy back who was on a Tory select committee seat for closer ties with the Tory. I don't know. Could be a crazy conspiracy theory, that. But let's see what your interpretation of it is.
But that's weird, because Zia Yusuf wasn't saying that Rupert Lowe wasn't allowed back. Zia Yusuf was one of the people saying on television repeatedly that we're happy to work with Restore Britain. Zia Yusuf has actually been lifting rhetoric straight from Restore Britain and repurposing it in Reform.
Oh, get over yourself. You just didn't listen to Zia Yusuf for years because he was a Muslim. Zia's rhetoric, if anything, softened over the last few months. The only way it's hardened is he started saying, yep, we're deporting over 1 million people. That's literally the only way that it has hardened. And even then it's because it's a similar rhetorical trick that's, well, always been a thing, where it's, well, we're actually going to deport 600,000 of them, said like 6 months ago or something. We assume many more are effectively going to self-deport. You know, it's the same rhetorical trick that's going on over in America. Wow, we're deporting like 1 million people. It just means there's a big outflow. The amount of people they've actually put on planes to deport themselves, it's in like the tens or hundreds of thousands now. Because operations this big, actually quite difficult to do, and actually quite difficult to get over 1 million people actually on planes and deported properly, like the way you're thinking. But yeah, also, you got to bear in mind, neither Zia nor Nigel actually expect Rupert Lowe to take the olive branch back. It's all just done for the cameras to effectively say, well, we tried. But you got to get rid of Charlie Downs, which we know Rupert Lowe isn't doing because he loves young boys around him for some reason.
Such as detain and deport, and we are the only anti-establishment party.
What the hell are you talking about? That's been rhetoric since 2024. You see what I mean? Do you see why I don't trust them? Just even when, we'll give Zia a bit of breathing room, we support him a bit, they'll still lie about all this.
And Zia's wise to this operation. He's responded, saying the Daily Mail is campaigning hard for a pact between Reform and the Tories so the Tories can suffocate us. They'll keep coming for me with this nonsense, quoting the same anonymous source, because they think I will die before I let that happen. They are correct.
God, it's just so damn based.
And also noting proposals by Tories that Labour should stand down in the second Clacton by-election to defeat Nigel Farage, as reported in the Telegraph, Zia said the obvious natural party for the dying Tory party to do a deal with is Labour. The Uniparty operate the same open borders, eye-watering tax policies, the same disdain for voters. They already conspired together to cancel elections. They'll keep conspiring against the interests of the British people. And Zia is right to be vigilant, not paranoid, because this briefing war has been going on for ages.
Yeah, dude, it's been going on for like 2 years. And guess who went right along with it? Lotus Munchers. You were part of them when they were doing all this stuff. You were attacking him for being Muslim. Again, this is what I can't stand with people like Connor Tomlinson. They will just memory hole stuff they've done in the past. This whole thing is acting like he's not been part of the problem of attacking Zia over the past 2 years. It's basically all he's done.
And these anonymous sources keep attacking Zia Yusuf and Restore to block both from preventing a Conservative Reform pact.
They're attacking Zia for that. They're attacking Restore, sorry. Again, I really hate how similar those names are, and I can't believe the Electoral Commission allowed that. But still, they're attacking Restore because they just don't like racism and anti-Semitism. It's actually a lot simpler than that. Reform aren't actually interested in working with Rupert Lowe. They just want the voters, and we're going to get the voters when it becomes very, very apparent that you aren't going to be getting the numbers. I mean, okay, you can still nip at the heels, but the sheen's off Rupert Lowe as far as I'm concerned, and all I've seen on Twitter for the past sort of 3 hours is, oh my god, why have you brought on Howard Cox, who's called us all racists and has been a massive Zionist for the past, well, as long as he's been alive. Facebook isn't going to care about this. Carl Benjamin's right to not really care about what Twitter has to say, but you are going to lose a fair amount of your sort of Zoomer energy eventually. And it's effectively just going to turn into Advance, and, well, Advance don't exist anymore, I'll put it that way. So, there you go.
A piece in the Eye declared, before Nigel Farage did the press conference saying that Charlie Downs would have to be exiled from Restore to do a deal, the Eye quotes senior sources in Reform UK, saying that Lowe's decision to retain Downs had scuppered talks and a deal is consequently not going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, you'd literally rather keep this incredibly useless political actor, like total moron. There's nothing impressive about him, apart from maybe his hard work. But you're more willing to keep that about than actually have, a reform, restore, pact, merger, whatever you want to call it, because you want to keep this guy who's just not particularly useful. Like, okay, fine. Like, if that brings Labour in, I'm squarely blaming it on you, as much as they've all blamed Reform for splitting the vote in 2019, which, by the way, is what we wanted to do. And if you want to do that too, but as long as you've blamed us for letting Labour in, we can blame you for doing the exact same thing at a far worse time for it.
They said for talks to happen, Downs would have to be kicked out of Restore's membership rather than just demoted as a Lowe advisor. Nigel doesn't want these kinds of people. The senior Reform insider agreed Lowe's refusal to wash his hands of the protégé had probably scuppered a deal with Farage.
Yeah, just get rid of him. Even if you want to be taken seriously as a party at all, you have to get rid of him and a load of other people who are bringing this negative reputation to Restore, but they won't, so that's why I'm just not bothered about them anymore. They're killing themselves.
And then that same insider accused Zia Yusuf of being a loose cannon, saying he does say things that don't look particularly sensible. They said that while Yusuf communicates extremely well, he needed to stop shooting from the hip. He would do very well in Parliament, provided he could be prevailed upon to think about what he's going to say before he actually says it.
I mean, that's believable. It's from the same Reform source, to be honest with you. That's a mild criticism of Zia. And Parliament is literally set up so you actually have to think before you say something. Hence, you have to say right honourable. You can't throw insults. You can't call other right honourable gentlemen and ladies liars, etc.
Now, Restore Britain have noticed this factional infighting. A senior Restore source said, and I don't know who this was, by the way.
It was almost certainly Alistair Harrison, because he seems to be the only one who's allowed to say anything for Restore.
We focus on policy, they seem to be interested in personality. The source named Zia Yusuf as one who is quite keen for an alliance. They said, from what I understand, they're having internal factional fighting, with Zia on one side and former Tories on the other, and Farage is somewhere in the middle. There's this factional war going on, let's see what comes of it. Yusuf told the iPaper he's not pushing for a pact, but he said, I have huge respect for Restore voters who are patriots that want secure borders and the mass deportation of illegal migrants. These will be my highest priority as Home Secretary. Reform will work hard to earn their votes so we have a majority we actually need to deliver it. So Zia Yusuf refuses to insult Restore Britain and Restore voters because he realises the overlap in policy and he realises that they are voters that Reform should never have estranged in the first place.
Again, he's still doing it. We never estranged them. It was nonsense from the Load-Seaters, from you, from Charlie Downs, from New Culture Forum. There are Will Kingston I think is the worst. There's loads of people now on Twitter saying like, God, maybe splitting the vote was actually a bad idea. And these are people who were pushing this sort of thing because they love Rupert Lowe so much. Sorry, he was disposable, as I always said. He was a net positive in Reform for a fair while, at least in the public relations department. But then it turned out internally he was an absolute pain and people couldn't get on with him. Sorry, net negative, away you go. Completely disposable. And yeah, there was a bit of a panic around the Makefield election. They got 8%, whatever it was, in the Manchester mayoral election. But I think Z is completely on the right track, and obviously he's in Reform, so can't insult them. But honestly, the staffers deserve insulting, especially people like you, Connor, especially people like Charlie, because they've done everything they can to scupper any sort of right-wing government we could have got in 2029. Thank God the wheel's coming off, the sheen's going, and you're finally getting the negative press coverage which I always said they would get, which they frankly deserve because they're really bad at keeping their own house in order. And they're clearly at a point where the policy is don't kick anyone out because it just brings more bad press. But you don't kick them out, eventually they're going to take over and bring even more bad press with them anyway. So you might see them forced to kick some people out. But, we'll have to see what happens. Anyway, in the interest of time, I think I will leave it there for Connor Tomlinson. And now we're going to move on to good old Carl Benjamin.
They're coming for Zia Yusuf,
Yeah, I noticed that 2 years ago, Carl. I guess it was right alongside them believing every hit piece they threw out, believing Tommy Robinson when he said, I've heard that there's a load of Pakistanis in Reform HQ now because of him. You were attacking him along with the establishment. And I don't know, it's like you've had an epiphany or something. It's like you've just gone, wait a minute, am I part of the baddies?
They're trying to oust Zia Yusuf from Reform UK.
Yeah, again, they've been trying to do that for years, and you were part of the ones trying to oust him. So, again, let's not play coy. You were literally doing the establishment's dirty work for them to the alternative audience. So thank you very much for that.
Now, I'm not a Reform UK supporter, I'm a Restore Britain supporter.
No, you're a bit more than that, man. Even in this video, you've got the imprint. You are literally a paid mouthpiece for them.
And of course, Restore Britain, born out of Zia Yusuf backstabbing Rupert Lowe and Nigel Farage backstabbing Rupert Lowe, making a series of false allegations against him and kicking him out of the party, which Farage just admitted to.
Again, until it's actually gone to a court of law and there's actually been proof that these were false allegations, it's not false allegations. This is part of the reason Rupert Lowe can't go on any programme live, really, because he'll just say they provided false allegations, and that's actually technically defamatory. To people wondering, but, you know, this never went to court from Reform's side either. Yeah, but the police found evidence and gave it to the CPS, so you still can't call it false evidence.
Because he had gone too far by saying the families of the rape gangs who knew about the rape gangs should also be deported with the rapists themselves.
It really does feel like it's been the same conversation for 2 years. I don't know how many times I've had to say, why do you need to deport them when, if they're part of the same family, they're going with them anyway because patriarchal society? Like, what are we doing here?
That was too far, and, well, some say we were a little brutal, but that's the way it's going to be, as Nigel Farage put it.
Yeah, I mean, this is just sort of a thing that we can chad yes now, so, yeah, he did. Unlucky. You picked the wrong side, dude. It's taken you 2 years, but you're finally getting that Zia Yusuf is the man he chose because he's just far more useful than Rupert Lowe. And as an added bonus, it turns out Zia Yusuf actually has a genuine resentment to the Tories, which, by the way, we all should have.
But that doesn't mean that Zia Yusuf himself is actually all that bad.
No, and he never was. You still spent years smearing him, so again, you crawl through some glass through an apology, please. You don't get to come out in the year of our Lord 2026 2 years later and just say, you know what, actually, he wasn't that bad. You had a massive smear campaign on him that constantly I have had to go through and correct the record on because you don't bother with any sort of internal dialogue, and it's pretty clear you know your income from Restores are going to end at some point this year, so now you're saying maybe our best chance is actually going to have to be with Reform. So thank you very much for that. Thank you for wasting everyone's time, including your audiences. Can you all tell them to vote Reform now, please?
As his political opinions are all that bad. Obviously, I'm not a fan of the way he's acted there.
I get the feeling by this point next year you're not going to really care. It's amazing how quickly these people move on for things. I'll put it this way, who even remembers Advance at this point? Who remembers Ben Habib? No one, really.
But overall, he's become the right wing of Reform.
Become? No, he's always been the right wing of Reform, I'm afraid. He's always been the very core of what reflects how the membership are feeling. And he's always been, frankly, further ahead than a hell of a lot of other people, certainly Tories, on where the happy centre of the voters are, you know, somewhere between me and some people who want further than me in terms of deportations, in terms of rhetoric as well. He's been the one pushing that. He's been the one pushing, we need to say we're going to deport over 1 million. He's been the one who said, you know, fine, we'll have Gemrick, we're not having any more defections after May the 7th. You know, he didn't even want Gemrick and Suella. Unfortunately, there were quite a lot of people who did, and to be honest, I think I was slightly more open than a lot of other people. However, the fact he's saying, Zia's become the right wing of the party, no, this was always the case. You'd know that if you bothered to actually listen to any of what he had to say, if you bothered listening to any of the Reform press conferences, but you never bothered. You just went out and basically said, oh, he's a Muslim, how can we trust him? As it turns out, when you actually listen to him, there's actually quite a lot of reason to trust him, mainly because he absolutely despises the Tories and wants them gone.
His opinions and Rupert Lowe's opinions are a lot closer.
Oh, I'm nipping this in the bud right now. No, Zia's to the right of Rupert Lowe, like, easily. Rupert Lowe doesn't want to touch legal migration, as you've nodded along to in interviews before. Zia Yusuf wants to effectively eradicate a large amount of legal migrants that have come over, let alone with the Boris wave, but even before that. I've said it before, but a lot of Restore rhetoric is actually basically just a copy of what Zia Yusuf has said for 2 years. Which is why I'm just always flabbergasted when it's like, oh, Reform are catching up. And it's like, even before Zia Yusuf joined, there was talk of deporting all illegals, which is all mass deportations mean, hence they all pivoted to remigration. Which I don't think Zia is ever going to say, but he's still harder line than Rupert Lowe on immigration, certainly.
Then his opinions and, well, everyone's ears left, which is basically every other Tory inside Reform.
Sorry, but even the Tories in Reform, some of them are Tories de Lender-esque territory. Robert Gemrick is, I'm pretty sure. Danny Kruger not so much, which is fair enough. I mean, these people still have friends in the Tory party, obviously. But there's even a clip of Danny Kruger basically saying, you know, what Zia does isn't my style, but it's still clearly reflecting what people want.
And Zia is this new force that's entered our world, and he brings an enormous amount of energy and real hostility to the Tory legacy, which, you know, it's not my style because these are my friends, and but you know, he's essentially right.
He certainly expresses, I think, what you might call Zianism.
Yeah,
does express the mood of the base.
Yeah,
And so Zia Yusuf has found himself rather isolated at this point.
No, not really. He hasn't at all. He's isolated from the political class, certainly. I suppose if that's what you're saying, yeah, that's true. But that's always sort of been the case. He's always been an outsider. Again, I showed you the clip of before where he just went up on stage and said, "We're going to destroy you all." Again, you'd know all this if you paid attention for the last 2 years, but you just didn't. It's why I gave up on you completely. It's why it's why my Discord's effectively turned into a Sargon refugee camp. Because they've noticed all this, and you've really done yourself a disservice, and it's going to take a hell of a lot more than, hey guys, I just noticed this, to recover this reputation. Because again, there's no trust here. There's no way I'm trusting that you've actually learned your lesson here, and I wouldn't be shocked if, within a week or two, you start bashing Reform and Zia again.
And Alistair Heath at The Telegraph, we've seen for the past, 3 weeks now, going hammer and tongs at Restore. Oh, Restore's an evil, racist, fascist, blah, 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 blah. Right, okay, yeah, leftism. We've heard it, Alistair. We've heard all the leftism before.
This doesn't exactly work, Carl, when you've basically said the same thing as Alistair, which was effectively, you literally said it would be better if these people left off. You did tell these people that, so you know they exist. So let's be real here. There's no deniability given you have directly addressed these people in Reform, which is all Alistair Heath is pointing out.
But he's arguing, look, the Tories and Reform must stop squabbling like children and find a way to work together, or risk handing power to their opponents on the left.
I mean, to be honest, I don't think it's an unreasonable position from them. I totally get it's a whole, save the Tory party type thing. I mean, it's called the Tory graph for a reason. But it's not like there isn't good logic here. Would you rather have a Tory Reform pact than a Labour landslide? I mean, come on, I think we'd all say, yes, that's obviously preferable to a Labour landslide, so I don't really blame them for this. Plus, it's the only way to try and keep the lifeboat up for the Tories. Zia obviously is completely against it, and I'm completely against it too, but push comes to shove, if we have to make a coalition, we're obviously going to make one. Like, come on. Honest Tories and Lib Dems will have been saying this in 2009 before the election then, despite the vitriol they were throwing at each other in public.
Well, I mean, that is what Nigel Farage did in 2024, but I mean, I'm not even criticising him for it.
That is such a change of tune to literally last week, when I've had to cover him over and over again when he's had a go at Farage for, can you believe it? He let, what's his name? Starmer in. And it's been that ever since, Ben Haseeth was on the load seats. It's like, can you believe it? They let Starmer in. My dude, you were the one pushing 0 seats. It was you far more than Reform were. I mean, even I at the time was like, obviously vote in decent Tories if you have them in your seats. But if they're wet ones, vote Reform. That was my position. And now my position is Tories to lend a rest. So, we've almost swapped on this. You can say you were more based at the time if you really want to. And you know what? I can take that L if you want me to. I don't care. I will also add, literally everyone was in the Tory party at the time. Carl was, Connor was, I don't know if Charlie was, to be fair. I was, a load of other people in my Discord were. Obviously, we all pretty much left after that because loads of people were kicked out. We didn't renew the membership. And we all just joined Reform because clearly it was going somewhere.
It had to happen sometime. Pull the plaster off, just get it done quickly.
Again, where's the trust here? For 2 years you were saying you shouldn't have done this. For 2 years you were saying, he let Keir Starmer in. That was obviously much worse. And now he's just completely 180'd again. Like, the man is a complete flip-flopper. And it's just pretty obvious he's following the money, which, fine if you want to do that, but it's quite clear that Twitter has started turning a bit on low, and everyone's finally come back to the Church of Zianism. But again, why on earth would you trust these people who've done nothing but bash Reform, and bash Zia specifically as well because he's Muslim, and lie about him, and not even bother listening to him or what he has to say for 2 years? Why would you trust them on anything? Don't let them in the party, don't let them anywhere near a position, and I'm still fully on board with Wandsworth deplatforming Connor Tomlinson, because why would we want him? He's got nothing to add to the conversation. He'll just say whatever gets him likes on Twitter. He's just clip farming, effectively.
But my brother in Christ, what's the bloody difference?
He goes through a whole Tories are bad section here. I'm just going to skip it. Let's get back to talking about Zia.
Jemrick says, forcing British workers to pay the benefits of foreigners is not just economically illiterate, but plain immoral. So yeah, where was this energy 5 years ago when you were in government? But whatever. I'm not gonna harp on about it.
Do you see what I mean? The message discipline from the Restore talking points, it's just gone. Oh my god, I can't believe it. Reform are saying the base stuff they were saying for 2 years, by the way. But man, you take a look at all this, it really does look like the wheels have completely fallen off Restore. Carl's still paid for videos like this from Restore, by the way. He's still got the imprint, so he's clearly still making money directly off them from it. But now we're almost pivoting to... It's almost like they've got the idea that actually, yeah, you do have to get fully behind Reform now. Like, again... I'm totally with him. Where was this energy 5 years ago? Perfectly legitimate thing to say. But this is what's really annoying. Carl's basically caught up to where I was up to 2 years ago. I've said it before, but I've been asked, oh, Haryan, why don't you go join the Lotus Eaters? And I've just... Because one, I'd have to take a pay cut for my day job, like they would pay me less than my day job at the moment. And plus, the stuff I put out is better than 99% of what they put out anyway, so I basically paid less to do a worse job of what I do anyway. At least I have a bigger platform, I guess, but who cares about that? I do this as a hobby. As it turns out anyway, everyone just gets to Haryanism in the end anyway, so it turns out I am inevitable.
I mean, Danny Kruger came out and said bloody the same thing, right? It's like, yeah, we've got a plan to stop foreigners claiming benefits. They should just apply for a British passport.
Just to defend on that point, again, he's got the normie position on it. He said if you've lived here for a long time and consider it your home, Britain that is, then yeah, and consider yourself integrated effectively, apply for a British passport, and then you'll be entitled to them. But again, this is all interlocked with the we're going to make it more difficult to be a British citizen anyway, which is obviously going to come in the first 100 days as well. I say that like I know that for a fact. I don't, but I'd be shocked if they didn't have this as a big part of it, because it's pretty obvious that even before they get into government, a lot of people are going to go for citizenship. In fact, we're even seeing it on Reddit with people saying, oh god, what if Reform come in, should I get citizenship now? Now, there's not a lot we can really do about that, but, you know, there has been a lot of sort of setup from Reform to start looking at, are we going to have to start rescinding citizenship? They're sort of setting up the argument for that, and you could tell that if you were following them for 2 years. I've said that in my own videos. But yeah, I'll defend Danny Kruger on this. You can think it's cringe, whatever. At the end of the day, there's normally voters out there that are going to be genuinely thinking, what about the people who've lived here for 8 years or so, paid into the system most of that time, broke their leg or something, or on benefits, are they going to be able to access it? And the answer is, well, if you're in this specific position, which, you know, won't cover Boris waivers, for example, then yes, there's a route for you, but this isn't going to allow the Boris waivers in unless we don't get in next time, in which case, well, we're going to have to find different solutions, aren't we? But this is what Carl does. He didn't listen to any of that. He didn't hear what Danny Kruger had to say. He just believes Basil the Rat, because Basil the Rat takes a load of money from Restore to lie about Reform, and reports it as fact. And that's basically what's happened for 2 years, and he's still doing it, so why am I supposed to believe he's a true convert to Zianism? You know, does he get it? A little bit. But I'll go right back to criticising Zia for completely idiotic reasons, probably within the month.
So they're not foreigners. How is this not globalism? How is this not what the left would do?
Because it's a far higher bar than what the left are asking for. The left are asking for live here for 5 years, if that, and you get it. Danny Kruger is saying go through a much higher, tougher process, which is part of the Reform policy, but anyway, we'll carry on.
But this is now Reform, a former Conservative MP, explicitly civic nationalist MP.
Dude, you told the ethno-nationalists to F off. Like, wind your neck in. We all saw the video. It became infamous. I covered it and laughed, because it just completely undermines any accusation you have like this.
Danny Kruger being like, yeah, so we'll just give them British citizenship, then we're not paying money to foreigners. How is that different to Gavin Barwell's opinion?
Because Danny Kruger's fully aware that it's not going to be a rubber stamp exercise with Reform, that's why, come on. And again, you completely missed out the part where he said explicitly you have to have integrated, lived here for a long time and contributed. You know, it's well within the Reform policy that exists. And again, I'd like to remind everyone at this point, indefinite leave to remain is just going with Reform, it's not with Restore. And Rupert Lowe doesn't want to touch legal migration, so where are you going with that?
And this left-wing Tory faction is in Reform, as you can see, and they are taking actions against Zia Yusuf.
I genuinely have high doubts that Danny Kruger is part of that. You know, as he says, it's not his style, but he understands that it's where the core vote for reform, and possibly even the wider general public, actually is. And as he said, he's not letting his own personal opinion on how we should deal with all this get in the way of that. So I highly doubt Danny Kruger's part of this. Danny Kruger basically just answered a question of, what if you've not got citizenship but you've been here for ages and, you know, recently rely on benefits? It's like, well, if eligible, apply for citizenship, and it's not going to be a rubber stamp exercise. He doesn't explicitly say that, but that's what reform policy is. So it's not a rubber stamp exercise like Carl's saying, but he doesn't care to go into detail. He just wants to have a go at Tories, which I can appreciate. But Danny Kruger's one that I am actually going to defend on this. Because bear in mind, Danny Kruger was basically the first Tory over the top. Like, mad respect for that. The first one to actually move from one party to another in Parliament. That was huge. Absolutely massive. It was described as 9/11 for Tories to me by someone who's friends with a lot of Tories.
Now, as I said at the beginning, I'm not exactly, you know, someone who's a big fan of Zia Yusuf, but to be honest with you, as time has progressed, and he's actually revealed himself to actually be right-wing.
Dude, as I say, I think his rhetoric softened, if anything. And again, he's revealed himself to be right-wing. I'm going to have to get the question time clip up.
Use language
okay,
accurately
but just to be
and fearlessly.
specific, Zia, because the reform policies deport all illegal immigrants in the UK within 5 years. So that would be, I mean, these are real people. That would be someone like you. And that's what you're saying, right? Okay.
If you are in this country illegally, let me be crystal clear. If Nigel Farage is our next Prime Minister, and that's obviously what we're working to deliver, if you're in this country illegally, you will be deported back to the country from which you came.
Again, I love that clip for two reasons. One, that was back in February of this year. So it's like, God, he's only recently revealed himself. No, dude, this was 6 months ago. And two, that is the most base thing I've ever seen on immigration when it comes to British politics ever. Directly saying to an Afghanistani who came here illegally and admitted it, yes, you are going home. Let me be crystal clear about that. That's fantastic. I've never seen anything like it, and I keep getting people saying, oh God, isn't Lowe based? Yeah, there's some things he says I can appreciate, but he's never done anything like that. And there's far more cringe clips of him than Zia Yusuf and Nigel Farage, of course, but no, we've still got to bring up the Edgington coat from 2 years ago. It's insane.
Like, Zia Yusuf isn't perfect.
Oh, see, not a Zionist.
But he's the best reform I have by quite a large margin, actually.
I wouldn't go large margin. Still got a hell of a lot of respect for Nigel Farage and still think I slightly prefer him to Zia, I'm afraid. But then again, he's got 30 years on Zia, so what chance does Zia have?
Like, he's the one calling out, he's like, look, you guys are a bunch of traitors. You Tories are a bunch of traitors. And Nigel was like, well, I'll have words with him. And Richard Tice actually came out and counter-signalled that. You know, Richard Tice was just like, oh, yeah, no, it's rubbish calling this Tory a traitor. It's like, no, I think Zia was on something.
I mean, it is quite funny to think about at this point, because quite clearly the fight between should we call Tories traitors or not, Zia clearly won that one because, you know, Tim Montgomery is currently suspended from the party and still going on the Daily Tea to gossip about why he doesn't like bits, or why he's got criticisms of bits of reform, which, to be honest with you, there's bits and pieces of his criticism that should be taken on board, but at the same time, the golden rule is basically don't have spats in public, which again, not everyone follows properly, but, you know, some people get away with it more than others, but Tim has quite clearly been throwing a lot of spats in public, so that's why he's suspended.
I think we should hear him out at the very least. I think he's probably got a fairly reasonable argument to make.
He doesn't actually watch the clip, so I watched it instead, and nowhere in that does Tice actually count signals Zia. In fact, all he says is there's no, like, animosity between Nigel and Zia over the traitor thing, so I don't know why Carl said that. He just doesn't check these things for some reason. I don't really get why. It's a 4-minute clip. I checked it myself. And again, the worst thing Nigel said is that he'll give Zia a ticking off. And again, I'm pretty convinced that Nigel didn't actually know what was said. He just said whatever he had to say to the newspaper when he first heard that this is what happened. And then clearly, in the future, it's, oh, well, people complaining about this can go, in fact. So it's pretty obvious who won that one.
But Richard Tice, of course, they back away from it because...
Man, it's not true. It's not true at all. Like, watch what actually happens. Like, yeah, Nigel has one offhand comment and then that's gospel truth. It's like, no, he makes offhand comments and then can go back on them, actually. And quite clearly, the suspending of Tim Montgomery shows you the direction they went, which is actually calling them traitors, is basically acceptable. Like, God, even covering this, he's just completely incapable of seeing what's actually going on, and has to complain about the rest of them. It's like, oh, Zia's the one pulling them right. I reckon his days are numbered. No, not really. He's here to stay, and basically everyone's got that message now, thank God.
They're interested in the pact because they think, okay, look, Reform have actually got separate constituency from the Conservatives. The Conservatives have got very old, very southeastern focused constituencies, the sort of Shire Tories in the southeast.
Dude, Reform has won a load of those constituencies. Like, you know, the more countryside areas, yeah, you might be right, but when it comes to Kent, Essex, Norfolk, aside from Great Yarmouth, Reform is steamrolling that. The Tory constituency is even a lot more constricted than that. It's a couple of shires, but, you know, it's even less than the Lib Dems in those areas now, to be honest.
But Reform actually have a large constituency in the north and elsewhere. So there is actually an electoral pact to be made between them.
Yeah, so you might even say the Telegraph have a point there.
And I guess it's because Nigel Farage can't finish off the Tories.
Damn, I wonder who helped the Tories survive. I wonder who was splitting that Reform vote. I wonder who decided to fully back a man who has said, not just once, but a fair few times, Kemi Badenoch's a great leader and he doesn't think the Tories are the problem. I wonder who supported a man like that.
I mean, not the ones inside of his party anyway.
Scott Benton, Gavin Williamson, etc, etc, etc.
Anyway, the point being, there's currently an attack on Zia Yusuf. And I've got to be honest, I found myself completely in support of Zia in all of this.
You should have been in support of Zia for 2 full years, to be honest with you. That would have been based and red-pilled of you, but no, you turned to the total slop for some reason. Again, I want to remind people, I was blocked by Carl Benjamin because I had the audacity to ask him why he's glazing Rupert Lowe so much, completely ignoring all the negative character assessments of him, but here we are now, and he's basically at Haryanism, with specks of chuddery still sticking about, and unfortunately the chuddery's going to come back with a vengeance anyway.
I don't really want to see him driven out of politics by a bunch of Tories.
I mean, it's amazing. The only reason you'd actually want to keep Zia Yusuf in the party is if you want Reform to win and do base things. Again, this is indicating he knows that Restore's not going anywhere and is having to fall back to Reform, which has been more right-wing than Restore for a while anyway. Effectively, what I think this all is sowing the seeds of, oh, this is how I can have a graceful exit from Restore. I think that's what's actually happening here. And effectively, they're just trying to cover it up with a, oh, I'm actually being very nuanced. Honestly, by next election, loads of seaters will all be saying, yeah, vote Reform. And I'll still be mad at them by that point as well, because we didn't need this whole distraction for 2 years, and they were happy to go along with it anyway. Why, you might ask? Money.
As bad as it would be it would be better for Restore if Zia Yusuf is driven out of Reform.
Yeah, and it's weird in a literal video where you have an imprint for Restore, you're basically admitting you're against your own party's best interest. Again, I know Alistair Harrison doesn't actually check your videos because he's far too busy with all the other stuff he can't do because he's too busy for. But I think for that statement alone, if I was in Restore, I'd cut off the income stream to the Lotus Eaters and to Carl. But they're not going to check this stuff, so yeah, get on the gravy train, dude. I don't blame you.
Like, because then, okay, I assume that Rupert Lowe wouldn't take him into Restore. I mean, who knows, right? Stranger things have happened, right?
Yeah, they have, but that's never happening because Zia Yusuf has one and only one mission at this point in time, and that is to get Reform into government and Nigel Farage into number 10. That's his only mission. So it's not happening, and frankly, he was inside, obviously, Reform HQ when it happened, i.e. when Rupert Lowe was kicked out because he was a pain to get on with, and I just don't think he'd bother with that. As it was reported in The Spectator today, like, Zia isn't going anywhere. He's there to stay in Reform, and, well, that's because he's a massive net positive. You know, he's getting you and Waitrose mums together to absolutely love what he has to say. I think he's literally one of the only people in Britain who can manage that.
But he is at least a right-winger. Like, he has been consistent on the point of, no, we have to actually do right-wing things. And the wimpy Tories have started to go on this, and this, I swear to God, this is what I hate about the Tories, right? It's this feminine politics.
I mean, yeah, there's obviously a Tory faction in there that's a bit like, you know, the concerned soyjack face of, oh God, I feel uncomfortable with this. When Zia does say stuff like that. But I mean, even trying to say Tice was counter-signaling Zia, right? That just didn't happen. You can say Farage did it, but again, long term, that's clearly not been the case. He's not been counter-signalled, and hell, he's gone off on one on Twitter today as well. Clearly, that rhetoric is back. And I've seen a few people saying, maybe we do have to tell the Tories to stop effing off and dying. And to be honest, I am sort of on that side now. It's not as effective as it was in 2024. But I think not letting people forget that they did betray us, did give us one of Britain's worst crises we've ever seen with the Boris wave, plus a load of other second and third order consequences as a result of both that and the complete mishandling of finances post-COVID. Yeah, don't let them forget that. Perfectly on board with that, and that's basically what Zia's doing anyway. So, Reform HQ are more than happy with that, because frankly they all feel the same way, certainly the very higher ups. It's a sort of middling to low level, it's not even all of them, but some Tory defectors that are like this. It's honestly not all of them that are like that, though. And it's because some of them still have friends in the Tory party and basically don't want them to see them out of a job in politics forever, but refuse to join Reform. So, you know, joke's on them, I guess.
Well, we're gonna start whispering about you on the girls' table. And we're going to be like, that's what this is.
Again, I don't think I'm ever going to stop going on about it, but basically every podcast is like that, and the Lotus Munchers are actually one of the worst ones for it. Again, you just told complete lies and gossipy nonsense about Reform and Zia Yusuf specifically, actually, for 2 straight years. So sorry, this is exactly what you do. So don't give me this nonsense. You're throwing the biggest stone while you're in the biggest glass house. Stop it. You are obviously the last person on Earth who is above any of this. Apart from maybe Connor.
Nigel Farage has reportedly fallen out of love with Zia Yusuf. A source told the Daily Mail, I think his day's numbered. Oh, did a source tell the Daily Mail that? Oh, that's very interesting.
Yeah, again, this is just an awful lot of political journalism. It's basically gossip reporting. Again, are you new to this? This is what it's been for basically ever. And all a source said means is that you were told this off the record. That's all that actually means. It doesn't mean it's untrue, but, you know, a lot of the time it is, because it's just gossip. Political journalism basically is just going to the Red Lion or the Westminster Arms, getting drunk with politicians, and reporting the gossip. I mean, just read your average... No one's actually above this. And again, how is this any different to getting someone like Tommy Robinson or like even Connor Tomlinson on and saying, yeah, my sources from inside tell me that Zia Yusuf put a load of Pakistani men in Reform HQ to work there. Like, you just completely made that up. So again, you're not above any of this.
That's very interesting. This comes from the Daily Mail, and it's just like, again, it's just the Tories, because Yusuf was, critical of Ben Wallace as a traitor to Britain over the Afghan interpreters. An argument that would extend to Robert Jenrick, because he's the guy who smuggled all the Afghans in under the cover of literally a legal injunction to prevent people from reporting on it.
Slight defence of Robert Jenrick. He got into the immigration minister position after the super injunction was actually imposed, and there was literally nothing he could do about it. So yeah, can't really blame Robert Jenrick for this, other than he should have used parliamentary privilege to circumvent it, but didn't. But then again, he didn't think the Tories were going to be as destructive as they were after that, and Shiela Burrowes did the same thing. Again, fair criticism of them, I think, but I don't think it was necessarily fair to say they 100% should have broken it, like I have in the past. You know, shocking, I've got things wrong and been unfair before. Who would have thunk?
Right? So every time you see an Afghan murder, someone in the streets, that's one of Jenrick's boys, by the way. Jenrick brought that person to this country.
I'm not going to derail him too hard for this, because I've said similar things in the past, but it is actually a bit of a misnomer. Really, it's Ben Wallace and Priti Patel's fault. And yeah, partisan politics. Part of the reason I'm much more fair on that is because, yeah, Jenrick's in Reform now. And yeah, in the past I saw him as Reform's biggest threat, but we poached him, so yay. And again, the man has burned every bridge back to the Tories. The man's fairly trustworthy, I'd say, but I don't want him leading the party.
Anyway, and he was defending it. Even up until last year, he was defending this.
Not true, actually. He came out with a big long tweet basically saying the whole thing was a disaster a few months before he defected. So we're talking I think it was September, October time last year, so not actually true.
Zia Yusuf is correct to go after the Tories like this. And so now they're on the attack on him. Now, of course, everyone is assuming that the source within Reform, who's leaking and saying all this to the Daily Mail and in The Spectator, is Tim Montgomery, the former founder of Conservative Home, who is on the wet libtard spectrum of Tories. So,
yeah, not really got too much of a problem with that. I mean, again, he was a fairly early defector to Reform, so, some props to him for that, but basically ever since he has been sort of counter-signalling a lot of our core policy, so, yeah, not great.
he joins, what's-his-face, Ben Wallace, he joins Alison Heath, Gavin Barwell, and Danny Kruger on the, no, they're just as British as you are, just rubber stamp their passports, and that's how they become British, don't you know?
Again, I'm not standing for the Danny Kruger slander here. That's not what Danny Kruger said.
As he says to the Spectator, well, I think that, it's all bad for Zia Yusuf. He's been putting a few noses out of joint, not least by calling the former Conservative Defence Secretary, Sir Ben Wallace, a traitor.
Again, you can just tell he doesn't watch these clips. It wasn't actually Tim Montgomery that said that. That was Tim Shipman, Spectator reporters, reporting on this. So, not quite right again.
And Nigel Farage did, again, as he says, back that up, back down on that.
Long term, yet again, he's back Zia, so no.
So it's one of those things, and he's been saying, like, look, Zia Yusuf is a bit of a firebrand. And yeah, that's actually another one of those things about Zia Yusuf I quite like.
God, it's like that meme about leftists. Leftists will find something about basic human nature and then tweet it like they've just discovered Atlantis. That is Carl Benjamin with Zia Yusuf. He's a bit of a firebrand, don't you know? Yeah, Carl, I did. I noticed that 2 years ago. While you were making hour-long streams on the guy saying, oh, some of his old employees didn't really like working for him. Shocking. Employees don't like boss. More news at 11.
He just comes out and, says his piece and stands by it. I appreciate that. I think that's a respectable thing to do in politics.
Yeah, do you know what's a really disrespectful thing to do in politics, Carl? Spend 2 years lying about the man, throwing out why he's the worst, throwing out interview after interview after interview with someone like, I don't know, Rupert Lowe saying all these things about Zia Yusuf when, alright, to be fair, he's got a personal grudge against Zia Yusuf, quite understandably. But you don't have any of the journalistic integrity you actually need to cross-reference any of this, to double-check whether any of it's true, whether any of it flies. You shouldn't ever, by the way, publish something where he says they put out false witness statements against me, because you don't have any evidence of that whatsoever. That can only be true in a court of law. You have to make sure it's alleged for that otherwise. Otherwise, you end up in GB News pickle where they can never really invite him on live because they'll just defame people, and GB News can't have that because they get sued for publishing it. But no, you're fine having all that. You're fine throwing out all this nonsense about Zia Yusuf. Oh, can't trust him, he's Muslim. And then it takes you 2 years to get it. Again, there's a lot of people who've taken Zianism to be a bit of an IQ test. Someone on Twitter came up with a sort of tier list for how Zianist you are. Tier 0's Nigel Farage, Zia Yusuf themselves. Tier 1 is people like me and some other people on Twitter who were basically always sceptical of Lowe and pretty much backing Zia for the last 2 years. A tier down is the people who, were on the Lowe train at first and then got red-pilled by people like me and others on Twitter who were Zianists. Then you've got tier 3ers who basically took an extra year, that's fine. And then you've got an extra year because they were following Lowe, waited to see what happened and got very disappointed with what Restore turned into, I should add. And then you got tier 4 who are the shameless grifters, who are people like Charlie, Connor, Carl. And people are trying their best to see him as tier 2 as they can, because it's not quite easy to get away with saying you're tier 1, because I'll know. But a lot of people try to say they're tier 2 when they know they're not, so they say, oh, I'm tier 2.5. And it's because they see it as an IQ test. It's now seen as an IQ test whether you back Zia or not on the right. Really, really good to see, by the way. I'm really happy this has happened in the wider context. But I'm not trusting these tier 4 recent convert grifting Zianists. I don't trust these people at all, because they've spent 2 years lying about him, calling him Muslim, saying Pakistanis are in Reform HQ now because of him. It's all nonsense. It's all lies. They just lied for 2 years, and they expect everyone to just forget. And unfortunately, a lot of people in their audience will forget because they're goldfish, effectively. They have a memory of 2 seconds long, and have effectively memory hold everything everyone has said about Zia Yusuf for the past 2 years in this video. And having a quick look through the comments, there's still a fair amount of Lowemosexuality in there, but, you know, I'm also seeing the term Zionist in Carl's own comment section with nearly 100 likes, which, you know, is on the higher end of the number of likes comment gets there. So, you know, it looks like there's a few people in Carl's comment section who get it. And, well, honestly, I'll keep an eye on the Lotus Munchers, and you might get 2 of these Lotus Munchers reaction videos in the same week. Because if this Zianism is spreading out wider to all these people, then hell, I expect at least an apology from all of them about the whole let's put detention centres in Green Party areas, for an apology for that nonsense they were talking about, how that's stupid policy, don't want that. When in reality, a lot of people absolutely loved it.
But Tim Montgomery's like, yeah, but you're not, you've got a tendency towards isolationism. And the implications for calling the Tories a bunch of traitors is me, the founder of Conservative Home, and my fellow Conservatives. Remember, there are something like 30 Conservative defectors in Reform at this point.
In terms of MPs, it's about 25, so around 30 is actually not that high. I mean, honestly, I thought it was a bit less than that. I thought it was in the teens, but oh well. But to be honest, that's mainly because there are people in Reform. 1, I didn't know were in Reform, and 2, I didn't even know were former Tory MPs. I didn't know Brent Bradley was a former Tory MP. I probably should have. Apparently we've got Chris Green and Liam Nicky. I didn't know we had those 2. But either way, you know, think about it. How many ex-Tory MPs are there? You know, you're talking in probably 500 to 600, maybe even more than that, to be honest. Because bear in mind, a lot of them live quite long lives now. So it's still a vast minority of them, to be quite honest with you. But again, if these people don't like how Zia Yusuf chats, and it's really clear that Zia Yusuf is sticking about, then they could do a Monty and just have a go to the press and get kicked out. And there are some people in Reform, clearly, who are briefing the media still in the habit of Monty. But in a way, Reform quite like that, because it makes it really easy to identify these types of people and effectively keep them from any sort of position anyway. Again, Monty didn't have a position in Reform. He was a glorified member. It's just because he had such experience in the media with the Tories, and he knows a lot of people in the media, he was on a lot defending Reform a lot, and he was defending Reform most of the time. But it's just quite clear to me that let's have a pact with the Tory type thought, or faction if you want to put it that way, in Reform, they don't have the power that everyone was assuming they did. And the reason people did is because they briefed the media a lot. But sorry, it's Zia's ideology that's taken over. That's why so many of us are so loyal to the damn project, because we've trusted Zia for 2 years now. And again, honestly, I think the best thing that Lotus Munchers can do and Carl can do is effectively have an almost grovelling session about saying we were wrong about Zia, or just go through a load of his highlights and effectively glaze him, because there's really not much to criticise on that front, especially if you're a chud, to be honest with you. The main complaint you can have is, oh, well, he's Muslim and brown. Don't care. He's absolutely the best weapon we have against the Tories.
And these are people who are just elected members of office, right? Like councillors and MPs. There are something like 30 of them now.
Oh no, we've got over 100 councillors that have defected, absolutely. Which, by the way, Restore would be absolutely happy with. Oh, you got a load of Tories in your party. Yeah, the thing is that when it comes to the councillor level, we don't really care. But yeah, in terms of councillors defecting from the Tories, no, we're talking probably it could actually be 200 for all I know. But from councillors that I'm in contact with, the Tories that defected are fine at worst. So I'm not too bothered about that.
And you can feel that they're trying to drag the party back to the Conservatives.
Some of them definitely are, yeah, but even citing Nadhim Zahawi, which I never thought I'd do here, I've never really seen him be on the Monty side of things. In fact, to be honest with you, most CMPs that defected seem a lot more like Zionists than they do Monty fans, just to be frank with you. I mean, Danny Kruger's probably the most sympathetic, but Danny Kruger, as I showed in the clip, also is completely aware that effectively the median voter is a massive Tory disrespecter. So he's, again, one of the fine ones in my book. Plus, he's doing a damn good job with his plan for the civil service, so I don't want to get rid of him.
Which, again, is great for us, actually, at Restore, but not great for the right wing of Reform, who are like, well, hang on a second. I mean, again, I say the right wing of Reform, it's Zia Yusuf, right? It's not great for Zia Yusuf.
Yeah, again, though, you're saying it's just Zia Yusuf. If you bother to actually listen to what anyone has to say, you know, any political journalist, who, again, all have contacts with Reform, Patrick Maguire's the best to listen on this, actually, from Times Radio, or the Times even. He says quite consistently, within Reform, where this Tory wing is, it's sort of the middle to lower tiers of HQ where you're getting them, you know, recent defectors who are nowhere near the inner circle. The sort of dozen or so people right at the top all love Zia Yusuf. Even Gawain Towler loves him, and Gawain Towler wasn't very happy with him for quite some time because of the way he was fired. But he's such a loyalist to the cause that he realised Zia Yusuf's actually needed, did loads of good stuff. It's even come out and the point's been made that vetting was pretty good under Zia Yusuf, but now he's not chairman anymore and he moved jobs after resigning for 2 days. That, yeah, vetting went to someone else and isn't being done quite as well. You know, he is a workaholic and did everything he could to build Reform into what it is today. The way the branches work, the nation builder, the database, the app, all that stuff. All Zia Yusuf's baby, effectively. And my branch chairs and a campaign manager even doesn't stop going on about how good Zia Yusuf was. They literally don't shut up about it, whereas I know Restore is struggling to make branches, keep them going. I know some of them are fairly large. I know the Cornwall one's pretty big. Just an example. But as I say, you know, they had like 2 massive campaigns, one in Great Yarmouth, one in Manchester. And you're really not seeing the whole look at our massive amounts of canvases for these by-elections anymore. And they didn't even stand in Clacton. Again, why is that? Well, they could obviously get the support. It's just, I think they're quite embarrassed of only getting a few % in the polls. Because at the end of the day, if you're trying to win an election in 2029, you've got to be doing better than that 3 years out. So yeah, well, there's obviously a Tory faction. They're not actually particularly powerful within Reform. And beyond that, the only reason it looks like they do have power is because they have a load of people who are friends in the media who they keep briefing them to. I mean, you know, we've had a whole 24 hours since this whole Monty drama. But he went on Daily Tea, BBC Newsnight. He went round the media to sort of tell his story as it was. Still fairly defensive of Reform, but at the same time, you know, he's not able to back Zia Yusuf and say, yes, I think he should be in a great office of state. Sorry, but, you know, that's basically as bad as what Lowe did with the Daily Mail. So he's not coming back. And again, what power does he have? There's not this massive call I'm seeing from the membership to bring him back. There's a few people who are sympathetic, but overnight, the sympathy is just gone. It's just gone. I'm not seeing anything on Twitter saying bring him back anymore. It's crazy. And again, just shows that he has no power, but there's a meme view of what Reform is actually like with Lotus Munchers and, well, with Carl especially, who's basically paid to have this opinion. So it's sort of no wonder that it's, oh, Zia Yusuf's the only person who's anti-Tory in that party. That is far from true.
And so Mike Jones points out that one of the actually important and useful things about Zia Yusuf is he was an outsider. Right? He was a total outsider. He spent 200k to buy his way to the top of Reform and becomes one of the co-owners of the company that Reform is.
So a couple of problems there. He's not just was an outsider, he still is an outsider. He's still a massive political outsider, which, by the way, which was what was annoying me for the past 2 years. We got the exact type of man we wanted, one who was happy to be more based in public than Nigel Farage, and basically could dedicate his entire time to politics and making political empires and building a political brand we all love. And Lotus Munchers spent 2 years denigrating that because I guess they absolutely love being puppeteered by the establishment. Oh, he's Muslim, don't you know? Let's go through this BBC article where it talks about him owning a dog. Man, what a great Muslim. Anyway, the other thing is that, you know, people can say he bought his way to the top. I mean, I'm not being funny. Nigel Farage actually did very much like him, and I think he'd still be in the position he was in, even if he didn't give 200 grand to the party. But he donated 200 grand, but he was never a co-owner. He never had shares in the company, he just donated the money, almost as a sort of, here's how committed I am. That's what it was. And I'm not being funny. Even, I'm not saying that it's absolutely no chance that he bought his way into the party. Even if he did buy his way into the party, which I don't think is a fair characterisation of what happened, who cares? He did the best job that I could expect. He got Reform, or helped Reform, get to a position where I never thought they'd get to. Topping the polls for 300 in a row, nearly a year and a half. Sorry, fellas, but I never expected Reform to even top a poll, let alone do it for a year consecutively. Yeah, sorry, if he did buy his way to the top, I don't actually care. He did a phenomenal job.
But other than that, he is not a political agent, right? He bought his way in. He came in from the outside and installed himself, and therefore he doesn't have all of the kind of habitual conditioning that all of these Tories have. He's actually not the kind of... He's not a libtard like they are.
Yeah, and it's absolutely nuts it's taken you 2 years to notice. That's actually crazy to me. I can't believe how slow you've been. And again, it begs the question, why after 2 years of smearing Zia Yusuf like this, all of a sudden are we pivoting to, you know what, Zia Yusuf's actually a really useful political agent, and, I think we've been underselling him. Why is this actually happening? Again, I think it's because they know the wheels are coming off Restore. And as much as Carl in the past has said, it's the Facebook mums who are actually going to push Restore to where it needs to be, I think he's had enough conversations with these voters to understand that, effectively, well, as much as there is a bit of cult of low about the whole thing, they are basically in the mindset of, if Restore don't improve and win something damn soon, they're just going to end up voting Reform. Because they understand they're the same thing, they just want Rupert Lowe as PM rather than Nigel Farage, but they're still going to be content with a Farage PM. And as much as I don't particularly respect Carl's intelligence, I think he's smart enough to see the writing on the wall there. So I basically think this is a pivot to try and be almost accepted into the Reform family. And I mean, I don't think there's much we can do to stop them being members other than, a media hit piece might come out about them and they're going to bring the party into disrepute. And hell, you've got a whole 2-year catalogue of them lying about Reform. So, but as much as we believe in reconciliation, there's not really much, there's not particularly much admission of being wrong for those 2 years here. So again, why let them in? I'd blacklist them from being members, but I think that might be going too far for quite a few people. And effectively, I think this is just the primer to wind up Restore, or at least leave it and let Alistair Harrison do what he wants with it, for them to effectively almost try and come back into the Reform mould. But again, I just wouldn't let them. But then again, you got the sunk cost fallacy here. Carl's been on a leadership course. He's been on canvassing training. He's still quite clearly somewhat committed to the Restore project, but it might actually be more of a case of they're realising they should have just been a pressure group instead. And I mean, I'm not being funny, but well, it's still up, go watch it. When we went through the Lotus Eaters sort of covering why they think Farage keeps losing, which is just a ludicrous thing to say, especially after Clacton. And even after what happened in Wales and the local elections, I know we didn't win Wales, but we've destroyed the Tories here. But they're effectively going on about Lowe's fake olive branch. And effectively they just concede everything to the point of, as we put it in the stream, they're just accepting where Reform actually is at this point and where it has been for 2 years. It's almost like they've been browbeaten by how difficult running political parties actually is and how many mistakes, frankly, the Restore Party is making. And they're paid, obviously, still to support it. But I think they've basically come to the realisation that actually Reform were doing their best to actually find where the median voter was and win elections. And yeah, even if that is your ideal, you're not always going to actually make that and actually reach it. There's only so much momentum you can keep in a party where you were telling everyone you've got to reach like 25% of the poll in Makerfield, and it turns out you get, 7% was it? And honestly, that wasn't a mistake where I thought to the point we'd hear Zia Yusuf is actually great within a few months, but here we are. That's how browbeaten they've become through their own idiotic mistakes, because, as I've said for ages, Low Seaters know nothing about politics. If you watch the Low Seaters regularly, you will be one of the most misinformed people on politics I think I've ever seen. British politics anyway, I don't know about American politics. But hell, this video alone shows me there is some chance of recovery.
He actually seems to have some right-wing priors, which is a good start.
Which is a good start, dude. He's been doing this for 2 years. Just go through some of his highlights. Literally, all you have to do is like go to his YouTube channel. He has a load of shorts with a load of clips of him being super based. Just go through that for an hour and a half on a lad's hour or something. Again, you just don't know what he says, and it's really obvious, and it's embarrassing you don't. Like, seriously, even in this, laying the groundwork for being a Zionist type video here, he has to still, like, poke holes into him. And again, it's because he's paid to by Restore. Yeah, you can seem nuanced if you want, just make sure that everyone knows Rupert Lowe is actually more based than Zia Yusuf. And that was even what he said at the start. Oh, their opinions are parallel. No, they're not. Zia Yusuf is firmly to the right of the man, with the exception of economics. But, I mean, I'm not being funny with you. I'm not exactly sure the British people want full-blown Austrian economics.
And this is a true point I think Colin Tomlinson makes. I think Zia's hatred of the Tories is sincere.
Really? Do you think so? He's only been saying the same thing for 2 years. This isn't the first time he's called Tories traitors, by the way. In fact, he's had so many harsh things to say about them, it keeps being brought up to him when he goes on about stochastic terrorism and Anne Widdecombe, which is a pretty obvious bear trap, by the way.
I think he genuinely, sincerely fucking hates them for being traitors. I mean, you wouldn't go and publicly accuse all of these people who are quite close to you in other ways of being traitors if you didn't.
In a sense, I'm actually quite jealous of Carl. He's in a sort of euphoric state about Zia Yusuf because he's finally got what Zia Yusuf's about. This was me in 2024. Oh my god, who's this Zia Yusuf character? Wow, he's based. But now I'm sort of in a sense of, how are you only just catching up with this? Like, this has been classic Zia ever since he's joined politics. And he was doing all this, by the way, alongside actually setting up the party, its branch structure, its app, its databases, blah-de-blah-de-blah-de-blah. Like, thank God we had a guy from tech doing all this.
And so, honestly, good for Zia. Good for him. I actually, again, it would be better for Restore if Zia were to drop out of politics and let Reform fly straight to the left under the Tories and Nigel Farage.
I mean, again, I'm not being funny. Farage would probably do his best to try and keep it to the right. The low seaters really do undersell just how right-wing Nigel Farage is. But again, he is also a man who does his best to try and ride where the medium voter actually is. But given the media ecosystem we have at the moment, you could be fooled into thinking the British are to the left of where they are. Not that I think they're ethno-nationalists or anything like that, but I think there is quite a hunger for mass deportations, especially of illegals. And you've got to bear in mind, when people are walking through the streets, they just sort of assume that a lot of people who may be a bit of a nuisance are effectively illegal migrants, when in fact they're Boris waivers or someone on ILR or something like that. That
would be great, but actually, because this would show that actually we're the only party really of the right here.
Carl, you're being paid by Restore. You're not really supposed to admit that Reform are just doing everything you're doing anyway. Especially with Zia Yusuf, of all people, being the person who's keeping the right-wing credentials going.
But basically, Connor's right. If you don't want Reform to become a full containment engine, Zia must prevail in the briefing war with the Tories.
No, thank God for that. He has done, which, by the way, was never in doubt if you actually paid attention to Reform and how the whole thing works. The deal for Tories that come over quite clearly is burn all your damn bridges. That's clearly what the deal is, and that's what most of them have done. I say that because now that I think about it, I guess Danny Kruger has burned his bridges by effectively saying the Tory party is over and it's time for them to pass the torch to Reform. But, it's not quite as harsh as people like even Robert Jenrick, who have publicly had a go at other Tories, consistently for, obviously, the Tory record. Oh, he was part of it. Yeah, he's aware, don't worry, he's making up for it.
That's true. I think that's why they're trying to get rid of him.
Yeah, he doesn't get points for any of that. He's 2 years late on this take.
Peter Barnes, excellent comment on this. This is why I'm featuring it, incidentally. Connor's showing the exact problem that Zia Yusuf is causing. No, not vested interest in secret deals. That's tinfoil hat, Fabian level nonsense. Zia is walking proof that Reform Party are fighting a war on two fronts. Zia being removed would be used to prove Reform UK is a Tory sellout party, a gift to restore Britain, as I've been saying this whole time.
Yeah, I mean, as people I'm sure know, I know Peter Barnes a fair bit because of the podcasts we've done. And I think my advice to reformers would be, stop engaging with his bait for God's sake. He is a man who's doing nothing but laying bear traps for you. You can approach him in good faith, and he does tend to be good faith back sometimes. But on Twitter, it's not exactly his habit, but it is Twitter.
It would be great for us if Zia gets kicked out, right? I don't want Zia to get kicked out because I find myself not hating him, even though what he did to Rupert Lowe. I find myself kind of like empathizing with being the only right-winger in the room.
This is very, very, very annoying to me personally for one particular reason. Carl basically blocked me for this take. Carl blocked me for this take, and 2 years later, Haryanism once again completely and utterly vindicated. So if someone on Twitter could mention to Carl that I have just been right the entire time, let him know and get him to unblock me. I want to have a go at him again.
He's done pretty good on Question Time. I have to say, I've been quite pleased with his appearance on Question Time.
The last time he was on Question Time was February. Again, you're 6 months late here. Why have you never done a segment on Load Seaters going through his highlight reel? Because, again, it's going to tell too many of your Restore supporters that actually Reform are a pretty good way to go. And you can't have that if you're being paid by Restore. Which is why I'm pretty shocked you're coming out with this take here. But again, I can only really see this as they can see Restore isn't really going anywhere and want to jump ship. Well, sorry, but we have plenty of evidence that you are not good faith actors. I don't want you in Reform. I think you'd be nothing but a net negative.
Their major recruitment ground is disappointed reformers, and this would be chum in the water. Zia doesn't even need to join. As Connor says, Zia pushed for harder deportations. They boot him, that's proof they're weak on the issue, Restore or not.
Yeah, Peter Barnes is completely right there. But again, I mean, when Zia resigned, you got to remember, Nigel Farage was almost in tears, to be honest with you, and in distress about the fact that Zia left, and effectively begged him back. And again, it's because of a fair few reasons, but there's two main ones. He's a really, really good media performer. And yeah, believe it or not, he's very right-wing. And Nigel Farage actually quite likes very right-wing people. He just especially likes right-wing people if they're not idiots. Which I suppose is a third thing. Zia is quite clearly very intellectual. And so effectively he just knows his gold dust, which is why we were all very happy when he came back. There were councillors literally telling me, they were in the middle of some meeting and they got news from their phones or what have you, Zia's come back. And it took all their willpower not to, jump up, cheer and punch the air. I was told that by councillors. Zia Yusuf is incredibly popular. And I remember those 2 days. It's like, God, where do we go from here? I guess I'll stick with Reform now, but I don't think it's got the long-term prospects it has. That's how important Zia is. And it's quite clear Zia knows this, because sometimes he'll tweet, effectively, he knows he's got mass support from the party. And, there's only one reason he does that. It's because he actually does.
On the other side, Zia is increasingly coming off the leash. We say lead in this country.
We do, but again, glass houses and all that, Carl. You say patriot, we say patriot in this country, but anyway.
Peter, it's another Americanism. People have been saying, oh, why don't you run for office? What do you mean run for office? We stand for offices. That's an Americanism. God, what's wrong with our politics?
Well, even that correction's an Americanism. We don't stand for office, we stand for Parliament, or stand for an election, or stand in a seat. So even your correction is wrong. Again, I'm only being pedantic here because Carl is, but he's being pedantically wrong.
Anyway, openly challenging others, defying Farage, and as a major contributor to the bro culture that's driving its woman problem and the active veto against them by the vote cure base they need to capture.
I mean, there is a bit of an internal debate of how much do we sort of need to, specifically women, and there's been forms of pandering, Women for Reform was quite a big push last summer. And, they keep putting Layla Cunningham, Sarah Pochin, Andrea Jenkins, that's her name. They keep pushing these women forward as well, and to an extent I think it works. But to be honest, come conference season, I think you're going to see more women in his shadow cabinet, which, from my personal standpoint, fine, whatever, don't care. But to some people it is actually important, and a lot of women do want to see women representation. And there are some women who want less of a blokey attitude within Reform. Now, there's effectively another side to this debate where effectively it's the women will just come to us eventually, don't worry, because, women are, not young women necessarily, but there are women that will just vote for the right-wing party who are basically offering them safety. there is a women contingency of that. And a lot of them are still sticking with Lib Dems and Tories for the moment, effectively because of, well, it's socially acceptable to. But reform keep women in elections, it gets more socially acceptable, and the theory is, well, women will go to the more socially acceptable party at that point. And we have a lot of women in it anyway. We have women MPs, we have women mayors, Shiela Burrowes in the shadow cabinet. You know, there is women representation if that's what we're after. But I'm not being funny here. There are women who are massive Zionists and absolutely love the guy. And I think basically for the fact he's just so well spoken, I think a lot of people do actually like him and have a lot of time for him for that. And it's effectively just going to negate the women problem anyway. I mean, if we specifically pander to women, will it get more women to vote for us? Probably. Will it lose us votes at the same time? I'm not sure. And I don't know what the best way forward for that would be anyway, because I think any pandering to gender is a bit cringe anyway, whether it's to men or women. So, you know, I don't even know what I'd like to see from that. But Barnesville's a political strategist for the Tories, so, you know, I always have to sort of bear in mind he doesn't know what he's talking about more than me.
Yes, and so basically Zia Yusuf is not happy with how milquetoast the Tories are trying to drag and make Farage turn the party into, again, just a Conservative 2.0.
Yeah, which again hasn't happened because Zia Yusuf is the Shadow Home Secretary, Home Affairs spokesperson. You know, it's quite hard to even say Robert Jenrick's going to bring them to Tory wetness, given the whole we're going to throw out a load of reforms to welfare that's going to end up saving tens of billions. And then you had Tories coming out saying, you can't do that. Think of all the appeals at court you'll have to deal with. Indicating once again that the only Tory playbook that they actually have is to effectively say, yeah, reform on all this radical change that a lot of voters are asking for, but don't you know it's actually impossible? Indicating they're not going to friggin' do anything. And again, it's been 2 years of this, and because low-seaters don't actually pay attention to anything, they've not realised that, you know, again, it's the whole discovering Atlantis thing. Carl feels like he's discovered Atlantis, despite the fact this is just things that I've been talking about for 2 straight years. I mean, come on.
Is what, unsurprisingly, there was no magic soil in reform, and all of those Tories who defected, when they were at 30% of the polls, were like, yeah, so now let's turn this into the Tory party.
Yeah, that's why there was a pretty hard limit on we're not having any more after the May local elections, because it's pretty obvious that Tories would be losing an awful lot of councils. Lo and behold, they did. And after that, you might get a lot of Tories saying, oh, God, this party's over, let's move then. And they didn't want that. Now, don't get me wrong, Nadhim Zahawi, still don't understand why he was allowed in, but he is, so whatever, we'll take a couple of really cringe people on the intake, whatever, it's not always going to be perfect. But again, what power does he even have? He's not got a position, he's effectively just a glorified member. I think part of the plan was some reform-curious people in the Tories who were like, can they really be respectable? Getting Nadhim Zahawi over probably could have been a signal to them for we're not going to be too harsh and, you know, hate everyone who was an ex-Tory. But it does give the perfect weapon to the Restore types to say, oh my God, look at them, they're bringing in these wet Tories. This is all despite Gavin Williamson being on the advisory board for Restore, but whatever. I never expected consistency from these people, and this is the most inconsistent video, considering the last 2 years, that I've seen. So, you know, again, they're just priming up for Zia's pretty good actually, and they're priming their audience to vote reform. So as much as I'm going to point out the hypocrisy, I'm not going to complain that reform are going to get votes out of this.
It's like, yeah, that's not great. And there's a reason why Zia Yusuf has been going kind of off the reservation here. Americanism.
Yeah, you can just say going rogue or something, but I don't really care that you're using Americanisms. More to the point, I don't even think it's true. I think Zia just does a lot of what Nigel Farage actually wants him to do anyway. I mean, again, to be fair to Carl, Monty's suspension happened after he already made this video anyway. But it's pretty clear that Zia is here to stay, and it is going to be a case of we actually quite like what Zia's doing. You know, I'm talking about the top of the party and Farage himself. So he's not going off reservation. He's doing what, one, reform core members want and core voters want, and two, what Farage and the board want him to do anyway. They are the type of people who understand that if you want to win 3 consecutive elections, you've got to be an aggressive maverick. You know, we've only had 2 prime ministers win 3 consecutive elections, and they were both over the past 50 years. It was Margaret Thatcher, and it was Tony Blair. 2 people I think you could call aggressive maverick radicals. which is exactly what Zia is. And I think a lot of people in Reform, especially higher up, know that. And frankly, when Zia's in his element, we do tend to do better in the polls. I mean, that just clearly seems to be the case.
Because this is actually important to what Reform is supposed to be as an insurgent right-wing party.
Yeah, so it's not Zia going rogue, it's doing exactly what he's supposed to be doing, and frankly, part of the reason he was even brought on board in the first place to do. Can you authentically hate the Tories for us for quite some time, and also at the same time come up with decent policy, try and sort out the councils? Turns out that's impossible. Okay, we'll focus on Westminster, come up with policy there. You know, can you do all this for us? Turns out, yes, he can, actually. And again, that's part of the reason we all love him, and why we want him kept around forever. And again, it's taken you 2 years to realise this, and all you had to do to realise this was not block me and listen to me. Because literally what you're saying is what I've been saying for 2 years. So please stop acting like you discovered Atlantis. This isn't unique insight. This is basically just plagiarism of my work. But I know you don't watch it, so I can't claim that.
And if they don't do this, well, I don't see them ever recovering in the polls. That's the thing.
So again, that just completely contradicts your own Zia's going off the reservation type thing. If it was in the Tory party, it'd be absolutely true. But he's not in the Tory party, is he?
So the challenge for Nigel Farage is which is going to be the easiest to contain. To be honest with you, I think the Tories will be easy to contain. I actually think they'll be far, far easier.
Oh my god, yeah, this isn't unique insight. He's been doing this for 2 years. It's really obvious if you actually pay attention and concentrate. Like, yeah, Nigel said some cringe stuff in the past. This was 1, 2 years ago, and 2, we weren't at a point then where Reform are like 30% in the polls could basically say what they want. I mean, for God's sake, man, what you've wanted for 2 years is magic words. Sorry, we're a bit smarter than that. And even Zia Yusuf doesn't partake in your magic words nonsense, aside from maybe if you want to take the W on mass deportations. But sorry, he's not saying remigration, because that implies he should be deported too.
But anyway, the point being, there is a concerted attack by the Conservatives in Reform against Zia Yusuf, who appears to be the sole right-winger left in the party. And as we've said many times on the political chats that me and Dan have, this is always a dangerous place to be, right? A day earlier and a step to the right to Nigel Farage.
Oh my goodness me, they're still trying to say this. Listen, what actually gets people kicked out of Farage's inner circle is just being an idiot. It's basically all that gets you kicked out. Farage values one thing above everything else, and that's loyalty. And why he really likes Zia Yusuf is because he has one and only goal, and that's to get Nigel Farage, not himself, Nigel Farage into number 10. Maybe after Nigel retires, he wants to take his place, and well, I for one will be all up for that, thousand Zia Reich, if it comes to it, although I think it will. Let's keep things democratic after all. But back to the point, this is just another mainstream interpretation of Farage that's designed to attack him as, oh look, he's just a petty authoritarian effectively. And you've taken that hook, line and sinker because it's negatively affected a few people you like, and actually yourself included. Sorry Carl, you weren't becoming more popular than Farage, you're just an idiot that killed UKIP. That's why Farage doesn't want you anywhere near Reform, and why he wants to get rid of Gerard Batten, because he allowed that to happen. But, he's kept Paul Nuttall around, he's kept Gawain Tyler around for literally decades. He's kept Tice around for years as well. There's plenty of people who have stuck around with Farage who, yeah, shockingly, some are even more right-winged than him. And Zia Yusuf may very well be one of these people. It's quite hard to tell with Farage, to be honest with you, because, frankly, he's very good at keeping how radical he actually is close to his chest, because he doesn't want to scare the electorate. But one thing he does want is trust back in politics, and he's willing to sacrifice a few of his own ideological pet issues, a flat tax for instance, waiver that, just so he can win votes and actually make the fixes he can within the democratic system we have. He's effectively Enoch Powell. Because Enoch Powell hated the NHS, but was still health minister, and ran the NHS as he saw was the best way to run the NHS for the years he was health minister, despite the fact he basically wanted a more insurance-based system, because he was a free marketeer.
Puts you in guillotine territory, because Nigel Farage likes to be the right-winger in the room, but he's not very right-wing.
So neither of those things are true. Again, even back in the UKIP days we have examples of this. And I mean, again, Farage isn't very right-wing. Do we have to bring up the Breaking Point poster? You know, do we have to bring up the average UKIP manifesto? I can't really be bothered with all this stuff. Again, as far as I'm concerned, Farage is massively backing Zia Yusuf, absolutely loves the guy, sees him as an absolutely massive boon to reform, maybe even is aware he's more right-wing than him, and he's keeping him around. Again, the reason this is all being said is because Carl wants monopoly on what right-wing actually is and wants his audience to only vote for that thing. And I don't know why he's bothering to still do this, because it's clearly not worked with Restore, for instance. But again, none of this is being done to try and poach Zia Yusuf, so I'm going to have to go with the alternative intention of this, which is effectively sowing the seeds of I'm going to be leaving Restore at some point because I don't think it's going to actually go anywhere, and Reform's actually a pretty good contingency plan. Again, all with the air of nuance. I mean, the other alternative is he is just being very honest and nuanced, but I don't know why he'd be doing that when he's still got the imprint of Restore in his little bio, so God knows, I suppose.
And if you are more right-wing than he is, he sees that as a threat, and he will want to get rid of you. And so maybe it's true that Nigel has fallen out of love with him.
I mean, basically everyone else in Reform has just said that's clearly not true, so I'm going to be trusting that side of things because, again, I remember how distraught Farage was when Zia Yusuf left and how much he was effectively begging him back. There's no way he's doing that just to get rid of him because he's more right-wing than me. He was even more right-wing, quote-unquote, than Farage then, and he still wanted him back. Again, Farage just cares about loyalty. That's all he actually cares about. He doesn't care about people being more right-wing than him. It just so happens that people get a bit big for their boots and think that they can outclass him. And it turns out the only person who came anywhere close was Rupert Lowe, and even he's not become that particularly close. Again, it's so funny. There are still people, political commentators, who say, yeah, it's really weird. I know Restore is talked about more in Britain now, but every time I go over to America, they don't shut up about Rupert Lowe. And it's like really odd to have to tell them Rupert Lowe is, even now, still pretty much a nobody. You know, he's more brought up these days, almost as a joke, because of his lofty expectations, and he's reached nowhere near it. And he's basically just brought up as a, oh, isn't he a bit of an annoying ankle-biter to Reform? But now coming out with videos like this, I get the feeling that even that's being wound down a bit. Probably because loads of comments on Facebook are effectively saying, can we stop splitting the vote, please? I don't want Labour in. And Restore know they're not going to be the vehicle that beats them.
Maybe it is true that he's tired of having to defend this. Maybe it's true that he's tired of trying to keep this coalition together. Who knows? But this is an interesting development, and one that I don't think is going to wait until the next election. That is, unless Andy Burnham for some reason calls an election tomorrow.
Yeah, I'm pretty much on the, unless there's like a horrific economic recession that goes on and effectively Labour have no choice but to bow to the will of the British public who are demanding a change in government. I don't think one's going to happen until 2029, frankly, because I think too many Labour MPs are going to say, no, I want to keep this job for another few years, please, and if you call an election, I'm going to lose it. And there's no way they're making 90 grand a year again. But the Tory faction, quite quietly, have been told, like, you know, you're not going to win any of these battles, so stop it. And Tim Montgomery is just the man who put his head above the parapet. I don't even think he necessarily did it on purpose, by the way. I just think he's too gossipy with other journalists. And so what's ended up happening is he's been suspended. And so, to be honest with you, that's sort of the battle over already. You know, the first one pops his head over, you know, boom, headshot. He's gone. Bye, you're not coming back. And then he goes off to try and go to a load of other TV shows, Daily Tea and the BBC Newsnight, to effectively still say the same things. And, you know, say, oh, I don't think actually I can't say if Zia Yusuf would be right for a big office of state in the Home Office. Sorry, we can't have people like that. We care about loyalty. Anyway, his points end there and he shills Islander. So, that's another 2-hour slot video from me. Don't expect these to be out too much. You possibly have another month of these. But my God, you know, I'm only human. I can only respond to incentives, and my God, do you piggies love these videos. But, well, you never know. Maybe the load seaters will turn full Zionist within the next 2 months. Who knows? I can't imagine they will. I think they're still too tied to Restore. But, well, I will say, reading between the lines, it looks like they don't think Restore's going to be the radical platform that they were hoping for. I mean, I've barely even seen them cover the recent policy papers they've thrown out, you know, the economic one, which I don't even think was necessarily that bad. It was basically just, we want to move a lot more Austrian school economics, which I'm all for. The problem is, I'm not sure if the voters necessarily are, but anyway, I will leave it there. thank you all very much for watching, you little piggies. If you enjoy what I do, you'll probably enjoy my streams. So I'll be playing Silksong later this evening. It's going to be a late start, probably about 10 o'clock, due to a branch meeting. And then Saturday it's going to be Laughing at the Guardian with some Warman. So do look forward to that. Again, if you enjoy what I do, do subscribe, leave a like, leave a comment, share the video with anyone you think interested. And of course, do leave super chats, super thanks, and become a channel member. Right, with that, thank you all very much for watching, and until next time, goodbye.